You think you have rights? The judge's voice cracked like a whip across the courtroom, his face twisted with contempt as he stared down at the man in worn jeans standing alone at the defendant's table. In my courtroom, you have nothing. What happened next would shake the foundations of a corrupt system, but not in the way anyone expected. If you want to see how one man turned the tables on a system built to crush him, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. You won't believe where this goes. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Millbrook County Courthouse sat on Main Street like a rotting tooth in an otherwise pleasant smile. Built in 1923, the building had that faded grandeur that small towns cling to. Marble steps worn concave by generations of feet, brass fixtures gone green with age, and tall windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since the Carter administration. Inside, the air smelled like lemon furniture polish, trying unsuccessfully to cover the mustiness of old documents and older grudges. Ethan Cole sat on a wooden bench in the hallway outside Courtroom B, his hands clasped between his knees, head bowed like he was praying. He wasn't. He was counting his breaths, keeping them even and steady, preparing himself for what came next. The bench was hard and uncomfortable, designed, probably intentionally, to make people waiting for justice as miserable as possible before they even got into the room. He was 38 years old, but looked older today. Hadn't shaved in 3 days. His jeans were faded but clean, his flannel shirt missing a button on the left cuff. Work boots with scuffed toes. He'd bought the outfit specifically for this, spent an afternoon at thrift stores finding exactly the right look. Not homeless, not professional, just struggling, barely hanging on. The kind of person who gets overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. Perfect. The hallway was busy for a Thursday morning. A woman with a crying baby paced near the water fountain. 2 men in suits spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing at thick folders. A young guy, couldn't be more than 22, sat against the wall with his head in his hands, his public defender nowhere in sight. Cole? Ethan Cole. A bailiff stood in the courtroom doorway, reading from a clipboard without looking up. Ethan stood. That's me. Now the bailiff looked up, and Ethan saw the flicker of assessment in his eyes, the quick up and down, the categorization, the dismissal. The bailiff was maybe 50, with the kind of gut that spoke to too many years sitting and not enough exercise. His nameplate said Williams. You got representation? Williams asked. Representing myself. Williams sighed, the universal sound of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Right. Come on then. The courtroom wasn't large, maybe 30 feet by 40, but it was designed to make you feel small. High ceiling with exposed beams. Judge's bench elevated like a throne. American flag and state flag flanking the bench like guards. The seal of Millbrook County mounted on the wall behind the judge's chair, its Latin motto worn and unreadable. There were maybe 15 people scattered across the gallery benches. A few looked like regulars, retirees with nothing better to do than watch other people's misery. A couple who might be there for their own cases. And in the back corner, sitting perfectly still, a woman in a dark blue suit with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, taking notes in a leather journal. Ethan noticed her immediately but didn't let his eyes linger. Just a quick glance. She looked professional, serious, out of place in this small-town courtroom. He filed it away and focused on the task at hand. Williams directed him to the defendant's table on the left. The plaintiff's table on the right was occupied by Marcus Drummond, a local attorney in an expensive suit that screamed, "I bill by the hour and you can't afford me." Drummond didn't acknowledge Ethan's arrival, just kept shuffling through papers with the bored efficiency of someone going through motions. "All rise!" Everyone stood as Judge Victor Hale entered through a door behind the bench. He was 63 years old, with silver hair combed straight back, and a face that might have been handsome once, but had settled into the hard lines of a man who'd spent decades wielding power over others. He wore his robes like armor, moving with the confidence of someone who knew the rules were whatever he said they were. Hale settled into his chair, barely glancing at the room as he did. "Be seated." The sound of people sitting echoed in the quiet space. Hale looked at his docket, frowned, looked up at Ethan. Case 2024-CV-1847, Drummond versus Cole. Mr. Drummond, you're the plaintiff? Yes, Your Honor. Drummond stood all smooth professionalism. This is a straightforward contract dispute. Mr. Cole failed to complete work on my client's property and refuses to return the deposit. And you? Hale turned his attention to Ethan, and there was something in his eyes, a glint of anticipation, like a cat spotting a mouse. You're representing yourself? Ethan stood. Yes, Your Honor. Of course you are. Hale leaned back in his chair. Let me guess. You watched some YouTube videos? Think you know the law now? A few chuckles from the gallery. Ethan felt the heat rise in his cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the effort of suppressing his reaction. Stay in character. I just want to present my side, Your Honor. Your side. Hale smiled, and it wasn't kind. You know what your side gets you in this court? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is a professional proceeding, Mr. Cole, not some backyard barbecue where everybody gets a turn to talk. Ethan swallowed. I understand, Your Honor, but I have evidence. Evidence? Hale interrupted. You have evidence? Did you properly file it? Did you follow procedure? Did you serve opposing counsel with copies in the time frame required by the rules of civil procedure? I filed what I had, Your Honor. That's not what I asked you. Hale's voice got harder. Did you follow procedure? Ethan glanced at Drummond, who sat with a slight smirk on his face, clearly enjoying the show. I tried to, Your Honor, but I'm not a lawyer and some of the forms were confusing. Stop. Hale held up his hand. Just stop. You're not a lawyer. You admit that. You don't understand procedure. You admit that too. So why are you wasting this court's time? The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan could hear someone shifting in their seat behind him. The woman with the baby had come into the courtroom and was standing near the back, gently bouncing to keep the infant quiet. Your Honor, I'm just trying to defend myself against false accusations. False accusations? Hale looked at Drummond. Counselor, are you making false accusations? Drummond stood again, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. Absolutely not, Your Honor. We have a signed contract, canceled checks showing the deposit was paid, and photographic evidence that the work was never completed. This is cut and dry. Sounds cut and dry to me too, Hale agreed. He looked back at Ethan. What's your defense, Mr. Cole? And I want specifics, not some rambling story. Ethan took a breath. The contract included a provision that if the homeowner made changes to the scope of work, the timeline would be adjusted accordingly. Mrs. Patterson, that's Mr. Drummond's client, made 17 separate change requests over 6 weeks. The work couldn't be completed because she kept changing what she wanted. You have documentation of these change requests? Hale asked. Yes, Your Honor. Your key, text messages, emails. Were they submitted properly with your response to the complaint? Ethan hesitated. Some of them were, Your Honor, but I couldn't print all the text messages. Why not? The printer at the library only lets you print 20 pages at a time, and I couldn't afford... Hale laughed, actually laughed. Oh, this is rich. You couldn't afford to print evidence, so you just decided not to submit it? And now you expect this court to just take your word for it? No, Your Honor. I have my phone here. I can show... Your phone. Hale's eyebrows shot up. You think I'm going to look at your phone? What's next? You want me to scroll through your Facebook posts too? Maybe check your Instagram? More laughter from the gallery. The bailiff, Williams, was trying not to smile. Even Drummond let out a small chuckle. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Your Honor, with all respect, I'm entitled to present evidence in my defense. With all respect? Hale repeated, his voice mocking. You don't know the first thing about respect, Mr. Cole. Respect means following the rules. Respect means not showing up to court looking like you just rolled out of a homeless shelter. Respect means understanding that when you step into my courtroom, you're stepping into a place of law, not some casual conversation. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the defendant's table. I'm sorry if my appearance offends you, Your Honor, but your appearance doesn't offend me, Hale cut him off. It tells me everything I need to know about you. You're careless, you're lazy, you think the rules don't apply to you, and now you're here, wasting this court's time because you took someone's money and didn't do the work. That's not true, Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. I did the work, or tried to, but the constant changes made it impossible. Quiet, Hale's voice cracked like a whip. You'll speak when I tell you to speak, understood? Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, nodded. I asked you a question, Mr. Cole. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor, what? Yes, Your Honor, I understand. Hale nodded, satisfied. He turned to Drummond. Counselor, walk me through the plaintiff's case. What followed was 15 minutes of Drummond presenting his evidence with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Signed contract, proof of payment, photographs of the unfinished work, a half-built deck, raw wood exposed to the elements, tools scattered around. Character references from Mrs. Patterson's neighbors saying they'd seen Ethan show up maybe twice in 6 weeks. Ethan tried to interject twice. Both times, Hale shut him down before he got a full sentence out. Your Honor, that photo was taken before I caught. Mr. Cole, you're not recognized. Sit down. But, Your Honor, he's misrepresenting. Mr. Cole, if you interrupt these proceedings one more time, I'll hold you in contempt. Is that clear? By the time Drummond finished, the case looked exactly as bad as Ethan had planned for it to look. He'd constructed this scenario carefully, found a real contractor complaint in the court records, contacted the plaintiff's attorney through a series of intermediaries, engineered the entire setup. Everything that was happening now, Hale's hostility, the gallery's amusement, Drummond's smug confidence, all of it was by design. But sitting there, taking the abuse, feeling the weight of the judge's contempt and the room's mockery, even knowing it was theater, took effort. He had to keep reminding himself why he was here, what this was really about. Mr. Cole, Hale's voice pulled him back to the moment. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to present whatever defense you think you have. 5 minutes. After that, I'm issuing a judgment. Go. Ethan stood slowly. He picked up a thin folder from the table in front of him. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence these text message exchanges between myself and Mrs. Patterson, showing the 17 change requests I mentioned. Objection. Drummond was on his feet. Your Honor, these weren't properly disclosed during discovery. Sustained, Hale said immediately. Mr. Cole, you can't just bring evidence to court the day of trial. That's not how this works. Your Honor, I filed a motion for extension specifically because, which was denied, Hale interrupted. Your lack of preparation isn't this court's problem. Then I'd like to call Mrs. Patterson to the stand to testify about. You didn't subpoena her, Drummond said. Ethan turned to him. She's your client. You brought her, didn't you? She's in the hallway, but without a proper subpoena. Enough. Hale's voice cut through the back and forth. Mr. Cole, do you have any evidence that was properly submitted and that opposing counsel has had the opportunity to review? I submitted my statement of defense, and your rambling 3-page document that reads like a diary entry? Hale shook his head. That's not evidence. That's a story, and not a very good one. Ethan felt something shift in the room. The woman in the back, the one taking notes, leaned forward slightly. Her pen moved across the page. Your Honor, Ethan said, keeping his voice measured, I understand there are procedural issues with some of my submissions, but the substance of my defense is valid. If the court would just... The substance? Hale leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Let me tell you about substance, Mr. Cole. The substance is that you took $13,000 from a 68-year-old widow and left her with a deck that's rotting in her backyard. The substance is that you're a con artist who thought you could come in here and talk your way out of consequences. The substance is that people like you make me sick. The room went completely silent. Even the baby had stopped fussing. Your Honor, that's not, Ethan started. A con artist, Hale repeated, louder. That's what you are. And do you know what this court does with con artists? Ethan didn't answer. In the back of the room, the woman's pen moved faster. I asked you a question, Mr. Cole. No, Your Honor. We crush them. Hale smiled, and it was ugly. We make sure they can't prey on honest people anymore. We make examples of them. Drummond was sitting very still now, and Ethan caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This was going further than a normal judgment. The attorney sensed it too. Your Honor, Drummond said carefully, if we could move to... Be quiet, counselor. I'm not done. Hale kept his eyes on Ethan. Mr. Cole, here's what's going to happen. I'm finding in favor of the plaintiff in the amount of $13,000 plus interest and court costs. You're going to pay every penny of that within 30 days. Your Honor, Don't interrupt me. Hale's face flushed red. You're also going to pay Mr. Drummond's legal fees, which I'm sure are substantial. And just to make sure you understand the severity of your actions, I'm ordering you to complete 40 hours of community service and to place a public apology in the Millbrook Gazette for 1 full week. Your Honor, that's excessive for a civil dispute. Drummond tried again. Counselor, I said be quiet. Hale glared at him before turning back to Ethan. Do you have anything to say, Mr. Cole? Any more excuses? Any more stories? Ethan stood there, and for the first time he let real anger show in his face. Your Honor, I have a right to due process. I have a right to present evidence. I have a right— You have the right to shut your mouth, Hale snarled. Rights? You think you have rights? You walk in here without respect, without preparation, without the decency to even shave, and you want to talk to me about rights? I have constitutional— In my courtroom, you have nothing, Hale was shouting now, half standing from his chair. You are nothing. Just another deadbeat trying to game the system, and I won't have it. Not here, not in my court. Williams, the bailiff, shifted uncomfortably. In the gallery, someone gasped. Drummond had gone pale, and in the back corner, the woman with the gray hair sat perfectly still, her eyes locked on the judge, her pen recording every word. Ethan took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. Your Honor, I'm invoking my right to appeal this decision based on judicial misconduct and denial of due process. The room froze. Hale's face went from red to almost purple. What did you just say? I said I'm invoking my right to appeal based on judicial misconduct. Bailiff! Hale roared. Arrest this man! Contempt of court! Immediate arrest! Williams didn't move for a second, confused. Your Honor, I don't think— Are you refusing a direct order? Hale turned his fury on Williams. No, sir, but— Then arrest him. Now! Williams moved toward Ethan, pulling handcuffs from his belt. He looked apologetic, uncertain. Sir, I'm sorry, but I have to— I understand, Ethan said quietly. He put his hands behind his back. Drummond was on his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. My client just wanted payment for— Your client will get her payment, Hale snapped, and this con artist will get what he deserves. Take him to holding. As Williams clicked the handcuffs onto Ethan's wrists, Ethan looked up at Hale. Their eyes met. For just a second, Ethan let his mask slip. Let the judge see something underneath. Not fear, not submission. Something else. Something that made Hale blink. Then it was gone, and Ethan was just a scared man in handcuffs being led out of the courtroom. As Williams guided him toward the door, Ethan glanced back one more time. The woman in the back had stood up. She was moving toward the front of the courtroom, her journal closed, her expression unreadable. The gallery was buzzing now, people whispering, phones coming out. This was more drama than they'd expected from a Thursday morning civil case. Hale banged his gavel. Order! This court is in recess. He stood abruptly and disappeared through the door behind the bench. Williams walked Ethan down a hallway toward the holding cells in the courthouse basement. Neither man spoke. Williams's hand on Ethan's arm was firm but not rough. They passed a window, and Ethan could see the parking lot outside, the normal world continuing like nothing was happening. The holding cell was exactly what he'd expected. Concrete walls, metal bench, fluorescent lights that buzzed. Williams unlocked the handcuffs after Ethan was inside. Look, man, Williams said, his voice low. I don't know what you were trying to do in there, but Judge Hale, he doesn't forget. He's going to make your life hell. Ethan rubbed his wrists. Thanks for the warning. I'm serious. I've seen him destroy people for less than what you did. You called him out on misconduct in open court? That's— Williams shook his head. That's career suicide for a lawyer, and you're not even a lawyer. You're just some guy. Just some guy, Ethan repeated softly. Williams looked at him for a long moment, like he was trying to figure out if Ethan was brave or stupid or crazy. Then he stepped out and locked the cell door. Someone will be down to process you in a bit, probably a fine for contempt, maybe overnight if Hale's really pissed. Okay? Williams started to walk away, then stopped. Hey, for what it's worth. What he did in there, how he talked to you, that wasn't right. I've seen him do it before, but wasn't right. Then he was gone, and Ethan was alone. He sat down on the metal bench. It was cold through his jeans. The cell smelled like industrial cleaner and decades of desperation. He could hear voices somewhere above him, muffled by concrete and steel. He closed his eyes and started counting. 1, 2, 3. At count 47, he heard footsteps. Multiple sets. Fast. The door at the end of the hallway burst open. Williams came through first, but his whole demeanor had changed. Behind him was the woman from the courtroom, and behind her was a man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. Williams fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking slightly. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Nobody told me." "It's fine, Williams," Ethan said, standing up. The cell door swung open. The woman stepped forward, and now Ethan could see her clearly. Late 50s, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Her credentials were clipped to her jacket, federal credentials. "Judge Cole," she said, and her voice was steady and formal. "I'm Judge Naomi Pierce, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I believe we have quite a lot to discuss." Behind her, Williams looked like he might pass out. His eyes went from Naomi to Ethan and back again. "Judge, you're a... Ethan stepped out of the cell. The change in his posture was subtle, but complete. The defeated slump was gone. His shoulders were back, his eyes were clear and hard. "Thank you for your documentation, Judge Pierce," he said. "I trust you recorded everything?" She patted her journal. Every word, every gesture, every violation. She paused. "Though I have to say, Justice Cole, that was more extreme than even I anticipated." Hale completely lost control. "Justice?" Williams' voice came out as a squeak. Ethan pulled out his wallet, not the worn cheap one he'd brought to court, but a different one from his inside pocket. He flipped it open to show his credentials. Federal credentials. Department of Justice. And a photo ID that showed him clean-shaven, professional, a different person entirely from the man who'd stood in Hale's courtroom. "Deputy Justice Ethan Cole," he said quietly. "Federal Judicial Oversight Division." Williams sat down hard on the metal bench, still staring. The man with the briefcase stepped forward. "Sir, we've been monitoring the audio feed from Judge Pierce's device. The entire proceedings were recorded and transmitted to the Oversight Committee in real time. We also have 3 separate reports from court employees about similar incidents in the past 18 months. Ethan nodded. "How long until we can move?" "The suspension order is already drafted. Just needs your signature and Judge Pierce's counter-signature as witness." "Then let's not waste time." As they walked back down the hallway, Williams trailing behind like a confused puppy, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1, complete. The trap had worked exactly as planned, but as they climbed the stairs back toward the main floor, he felt the weight of what came next. Exposing Hale was just the beginning. The real question was whether the system would protect its own, or whether justice would actually be served. They reached the main hallway. Through the window in the courtroom door, Ethan could see Hale back at the bench, dealing with another case. The judge looked calm now, composed, like the explosion from earlier had never happened. That was the thing about men like Hale. They knew how to put the mask back on, knew how to be professional when it mattered, to save the cruelty for people who couldn't fight back. Not anymore. Naomi touched his arm. "Ready?" Ethan looked at her, then at the courtroom door, then back at her. "More than ready." She pushed the door open and they walked in together. The bailiff, a different one, not Williams, started to speak, but Naomi held up her credentials. "Federal Judicial Oversight," she said clearly. "This court is now under immediate review." Hale looked up from the case he was hearing, his expression morphing from confusion to recognition to something like fear in the space of 3 seconds. And Ethan stepped forward, no longer the powerless defendant, but something else entirely. Something Hale had never expected to see in his courtroom. The hunter, not the prey. The courtroom didn't erupt into chaos. That would have been easier to manage. Instead, there was this horrible suspended moment where everyone simply stopped moving, stopped breathing, like the whole room had been flash frozen. Hale's face went through about 6 different expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, because he didn't understand what was happening yet. Recognition, as Naomi's credentials registered. Disbelief, because this couldn't be real. Then anger, pure reflexive anger at being interrupted. And finally, something that looked almost like calculation, his mind already working on how to spin this, how to control it. The defendant at the table, a middle-aged woman in a faded dress who'd been in the middle of explaining why she couldn't pay a parking ticket, looked from Naomi to Hale and back again, her mouth slightly open. Drummond, still sitting at the plaintiff's table from the previous case, had gone very still. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume. "Excuse me?" Hale's voice was controlled, but Ethan could hear the tremor underneath. "Who do you think you are, interrupting these proceedings?" Naomi walked forward with measured steps, her heels clicking on the old hardwood floor. She held her credentials up higher. "Judge Naomi Pierce, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and this is Deputy Justice Ethan Cole from the Federal Judicial Oversight Division." The woman at the defendant's table made a small sound, like a gasp cut short. Hale stood up slowly. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You can't just walk into my courtroom and—" "Your courtroom?" Ethan spoke for the first time since entering, and his voice carried differently now, not the hesitant, uncertain tone from before. This was steady, authoritative. "This is a public courtroom in a federal jurisdiction, Judge Hale. It doesn't belong to you." Hale's eyes snapped to him, and Ethan watched the recognition hit. The judge's face went pale, then flushed red again. You were lying." "I was investigating," Ethan corrected. "There's a difference." "This is entrapment. This is—" Hale sputtered, and for the first time since Ethan had entered this building, the judge looked genuinely rattled. "This is an oversight investigation authorized by the Federal Judicial Review Board," Naomi said calmly. She pulled a folded document from her jacket pocket. "We have credible reports of systematic abuse of authority, denial of due process, and judicial misconduct spanning the last 3 years. What happened in your courtroom 45 minutes ago simply confirmed those reports." The bailiff by the door, Jenkins, according to his nameplate, looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. The court reporter, a woman in her 40s who'd been typing away mechanically, had her hands frozen over her machine. "I want to see credentials," Hale demanded. "Real credentials, not just some badge you flash around." Ethan pulled out his federal ID and walked it up to the bench. Hale snatched it from his hand, studying it with the intensity of a man looking for a lifeline. But the ID was real. The photo matched, even if it showed a clean-shaven Ethan in a suit rather than the stubbled man in work clothes. The seal was genuine. The authorization code could be verified with a single phone call. Hale's hand shook slightly as he handed the ID back. This is irregular. You can't conduct an investigation by lying to a sitting judge." "Actually, we can," Naomi said. She'd moved to stand beside Ethan now, a united front. "Federal oversight has broad authority to test judicial conduct through controlled scenarios. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court in 3 separate cases." "Controlled scenarios?" Hale's laugh was bitter. "You mean entrapment? Call it what you want," Ethan said. "The facts remain. You denied me the right to present evidence. You refused to allow witness testimony. You made personal attacks and judgments about my character based on my appearance. You ordered my arrest for contempt when I attempted to invoke my appellate rights. You were disrupting I was exercising my constitutional rights," Ethan cut him off, "which you violated, repeatedly, on the record." The court reporter was looking at her machine now, and Ethan could see her face had gone white. She knew. Everything that had been said, every word of Hale's tirade, was right there in the transcript. Drummond stood up slowly. "Your Honor, if I may—" "Sit down, counselor," Naomi said without looking at him. "You're not part of this. Yet." Drummond sat. Hale seemed to pull himself together. His shoulders went back, and when he spoke again, his voice had regained some of its earlier authority. "I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill here. Yes, I was harsh with Justice Cole, but he was presenting himself as a pro-se litigant who clearly didn't understand procedure. I was trying to maintain order in my court." "By calling him a con artist?" Naomi asked. "Naomi, that was based on the evidence presented by saying he had no rights in your courtroom? That was hyperbole, obviously. By ordering his arrest for invoking his right to appeal?" Hale's jaw clenched. "He was being disruptive. He quoted the law," Ethan said quietly, "and you had him arrested for it." The woman at the defendant's table had started crying softly. Jenkins, the bailiff, moved toward her, but she waved him off. Ethan realized she was crying from relief, not distress. How many times had she sat in courtrooms like this, facing judges like Hale, thinking the system was supposed to work this way? Hale must have realized he was losing ground because his tactics shifted. Look, if there was a misunderstanding, I apologize. The case was frustrating, and perhaps I let my emotions get the better of me, but that hardly warrants a federal investigation. I've served this county for 23 years. We know, Naomi interrupted. We've read all 23 years' worth of complaints. The room went quiet again. Complaints that were dismissed, Hale said, but his voice had lost its edge. Because they were baseless. Complaints that were dismissed by your colleagues in the district, Ethan corrected. Judges who work with you, socialize with you, depend on you for case assignments and committee appointments. That's called conflict of interest, Judge Hale. That's called professional courtesy, Hale shot back. We don't throw our own under the bus over every frivolous grievance from some disgruntled defendant. He stopped himself, but too late. The words hung in the air like smoke. From some disgruntled defendant? Naomi repeated softly. Is that how you see people who file complaints against you? As frivolous? Disgruntled? Hale didn't answer. Ethan pulled a folder from the briefcase that the federal agent, his name was Carson, had brought. He opened it and read aloud. March 2023. Sandra Lewis files a complaint alleging you refused to grant a continuance when her attorney had a documented medical emergency, resulting in a default judgment against her. Complaint dismissed by Judge Herman, who you appointed to the Ethics Review Committee. He flipped a page. July 2023. Robert Chen alleges you made disparaging comments about his immigration status during a traffic dispute hearing. Complaint dismissed by Judge Waverly, who was your former law partner. Another page. November 2023. Patricia Goodwin claims you threatened her with jail time for asking questions about court procedure. She was 72 years old and representing herself in a property dispute. Complaint dismissed by, surprise, Judge Herman again. Those were investigated thoroughly, Hale protested, but he'd sat down now and his hands gripped the arms of his chair. Those were buried, Naomi said flatly, and those are just the formal complaints. We've also conducted interviews with public defenders, court staff, and members of the community. Would you like to hear what they said? Hale's eyes darted to Jenkins, to the court reporter, back to Naomi. Those interviews were confidential. No, they were voluntary, Ethan said. People wanted to talk. They've wanted to talk for years. They were just afraid. Afraid of what? Hale's voice rose. I've never threatened anyone. You threatened me with jail less than an hour ago, Ethan reminded him, for citing the law. That was different. You were... Different how? Because you thought I was just some contractor you could bully, someone without resources or connections? Ethan leaned forward slightly. That's the whole point, Judge Hale. You're perfectly professional when you think someone might fight back. But when you think they're powerless, when you think they're alone, that's when you show who you really are. The woman at the defendant's table let out a small sob. She was nodding, her hand over her mouth. Hale looked at her and something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt, more like irritation at being betrayed by someone he'd considered beneath notice. Your Honor. The court reporter's voice was quiet but clear. Everyone turned to look at her. She was still sitting at her machine, but her hands were folded in her lap now. May I be excused? Why? Hale asked sharply. Because I don't think I should be recording this conversation, she said. It seems like it's moved beyond official court business. Everything that happens in this courtroom is official court business, Hale snapped. Then I'll stay, she said, and placed her hands back on the keys. Her expression was neutral, but Ethan caught the smallest hint of satisfaction in her eyes. She'd been waiting for this too. Hale seemed to realize he was surrounded. The court reporter who'd witnessed everything. The bailiff who'd executed his illegal orders. The defendant who'd been victimized. And now 2 federal judges who'd documented it all. He tried one more angle. I want to call my attorney. Of course, Naomi said. You have that right. Though I should inform you that this isn't a criminal proceeding. Not yet. This is an administrative review. You're not being charged with anything at this moment. At this moment, Hale repeated. Meaning what? Meaning that depends on what happens next, Ethan said. He pulled out a single sheet of paper from the folder. This is a temporary suspension order. It removes you from the bench pending a full investigation into your conduct. You'll continue to receive your salary, and you'll have the opportunity to present your defense before the review board. You can't suspend me. I'm an elected official. You're an elected official who serves at the pleasure of the state judiciary, Naomi corrected. And the state judiciary has authorized us to take immediate action in cases of gross misconduct. What happened today qualifies. Hale stared at the paper like it was a snake. I won't sign that. You don't have to, Ethan said. Judge Pierce and I both witnessed your conduct firsthand. Our signatures are sufficient for a temporary order. However, if you refuse to acknowledge it, we'll have to have you formally served, which means sheriffs, which means media attention. That hit home. Ethan watched Hale's face as he calculated the optics, signing quietly versus being escorted out by law enforcement while cameras rolled. This is a witch hunt, Hale said, but the fire had gone out of his voice. I've made this county safer, more efficient. I've cleared backlogs, streamlined processes. You've terrorized people who couldn't fight back, Ethan interrupted. And you did it because you could, because you thought no one was watching. Someone was always watching, Naomi added quietly. She gestured to the gallery, which had filled up during the confrontation. Word had spread through the courthouse, and now there were maybe 30 people crowded into the benches and standing along the walls. Court staff, attorneys, people with cases pending, all watching in silence as a judge faced consequences. Hale looked out at them, and Ethan saw the moment he understood. These weren't spectators, these were witnesses. Some of them were probably his victims, people he'd humiliated or bullied over the years, and they were here to watch him fall. I need time, Hale said finally, to consult with my attorney to— You have until 5 o'clock today to vacate your chambers, Ethan said. Personal items only. All case files and court documents remain property of the court. 5 o'clock? That's 3 hours. That's generous, Naomi said. We could have security escort you out right now. Hale's hands were shaking now, actually visibly shaking. He looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. 23 years, he said quietly. I've served for 23 years. And for at least 3 of those years, you've been abusing your position, Ethan said. Probably longer, but that's what we can prove right now. Jenkins cleared his throat. Your Honor, Judge Hale, should I notify the other cases scheduled for today? Hale didn't answer. He was still staring at his hands. Yes, Naomi said, answering for him. All of Judge Hale's cases will be reassigned. Judge Martinez from the district court has agreed to handle emergency matters, and will bring in visiting judges for the remainder of the docket. The woman at the defendant's table raised her hand tentatively, like a student in class. What about, my case, the parking ticket? Dismissed, Ethan said. You're free to go. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Then she hurried out before anyone could change their minds. Drummond was still sitting frozen at the plaintiff's table. Ethan walked over to him. Counselor, you're going to need to contact Mrs. Patterson and explain that the judgment against me is void. The whole case was fabricated as part of this investigation. Drummond nodded mutely. You'll also want to review any other cases you've brought before Judge Hale, Naomi added. His rulings are going to be scrutinized. If there's anything questionable, you should get ahead of it. Drummond found his voice. The judgment, it was legitimate. My client really did have a complaint about a contractor, just not— He trailed off, looking at Ethan with new understanding. You used a real case. We always use real cases, Ethan said. That's the only way to see how a judge actually behaves under normal circumstances. But I didn't know. You thought you were facing a regular defendant, Ethan finished, which is exactly the point. Judge Hale's behavior toward me should have been the same whether I was a federal justice or an actual contractor. The law doesn't change based on who's standing in front of you. Drummond gathered his papers with shaking hands. I need to make some calls. You do that, Naomi said. As Drummond left, Hale finally looked up. His eyes were red, and he'd aged about 10 years in the last 20 minutes. What happens now? Now you go to your chambers, collect your personal belongings, and go home, Ethan said. The review board will contact you within 72 hours to schedule a formal hearing. You'll be allowed to present evidence, call witnesses, make your case. Will I keep my pension? The question was so small, so defeated, that Ethan almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That depends on the findings, Naomi said. If this is determined to be a pattern of misconduct, you could face sanctions ranging from reprimand to permanent removal. In extreme cases, criminal charges for civil rights violations. Criminal charges, Hale repeated numbly. You arrested someone for invoking their constitutional rights, Ethan reminded him. That's a federal offense. Whether we pursue it depends on a lot of factors, including your cooperation with this investigation. Hale stood up slowly, like his joints hurt. He looked around his courtroom, the bench he'd ruled from, the seal on the wall, the flags he'd sworn to uphold. I was trying to keep order, he said quietly. People come in here, they don't respect the process. They waste time. They lie. I was just trying to make sure justice got done. Justice? Ethan let the word hang there for a moment. You told me I had no rights in your courtroom. You called me names. You refused to let me present evidence. You mocked my appearance and my financial situation. What part of that was justice, Judge Hale? Hale didn't answer. The problem isn't that you were harsh, Naomi said. Courts need discipline and structure. The problem is that you forgot the people standing in front of you are human beings. They're not case numbers or obstacles to your efficiency. They're citizens who deserve respect and fairness, regardless of whether they can afford a good attorney or know all the procedural rules. I treated everyone the same, Hale protested weakly. No, Ethan said. You treated everyone you perceived as weak the same. I watched you with Drummond. You were professional, courteous, even deferential at times. But with me, when you thought I was just some broke contractor, you were cruel. The word landed like a physical blow. Hale flinched. I wasn't cruel. You were cruel, Ethan repeated. And you enjoyed it. I could see it in your face, every time you shut me down, every time you got a laugh from the gallery, every time you reminded me how powerless I was. You enjoyed it. Hale's face crumpled. For a second, Ethan thought he might cry. But then the judge pulled himself together one more time, straightened his robes, and walked down from the bench with as much dignity as he could manage. As he passed Ethan and Naomi, he paused. I hope you're proud of yourselves, destroying a career over one bad day. One bad day? Naomi's voice was sharp. Judge Hale, we have testimony from 17 different individuals describing similar treatment. We have complaints going back 3 years. We have court reporters, bailiffs, and clerks who all describe a pattern of behavior. This wasn't one bad day. This was your standard operating procedure. Hale's jaw worked like he wanted to say something else, but nothing came out. He turned and walked toward his chambers without another word. Jenkins followed at a respectful distance, probably to make sure Hale didn't destroy evidence or do something rash. When they were gone, the courtroom seemed to deflate. The crowd that had gathered started dispersing, conversations breaking out in hushed tones. Ethan heard fragments as people filed out. About time someone always knew he was. My cousin had a case with him, said he made her cry. The court reporter stood up from her machine. She was a small woman, maybe 5'2", with graying hair and glasses on a chain. She approached Ethan and Naomi cautiously. Excuse me, she said. I'm Linda Morrison. I've been the court reporter in this courtroom for 9 years. Miss Morrison, Naomi acknowledged, your transcript is going to be crucial evidence. Linda nodded. I know. And I want you to know, I have recordings too, audio backups. They're supposed to be just for verification purposes, but I kept them. All of them. Every case where I thought he crossed a line. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. How many? 43, Linda said. 43 cases over the last 2 years where I documented behavior I thought was inappropriate. I didn't know what to do with them. I tried filing a complaint once, but Judge Herman told me I was being too sensitive, that Judge Hale's methods were unorthodox but effective. We'll need those recordings, Naomi said gently. I'll get them to you today, Linda promised. I want you to know it's not just what happened to you this morning. It's been happening for years, to people who couldn't defend themselves. Single mothers, immigrants, elderly people, folks with mental health issues, anyone he thought wouldn't fight back. Why didn't you come forward before, like Ethan asked, not accusatory, just curious. Linda looked down at her hands. Because I was scared. Because I need this job. Because the last person who complained about a judge in this county got transferred to traffic court and spent 2 years recording speeding tickets before she finally quit. She looked back up, and there were tears in her eyes. I'm not brave like you. I couldn't put on work clothes and walk in here knowing what would happen. I documented. It's all I knew how to do. Naomi put a hand on Linda's shoulder. Documentation is courage, Ms. Morrison. You created a record when you thought no one was listening. That takes bravery. Linda wiped her eyes. Will the recordings actually matter, or will this just get swept under the rug like everything else? They'll matter, Ethan assured her. This isn't going away. Not this time. She nodded and went back to pack up her equipment. Carson, the federal agent who'd been standing quietly by the door, approached Ethan and Naomi. We should probably clear out before the media gets wind of this. I saw at least 3 people filming on their phones. Let them film, Ethan said. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. But the investigation is going forward regardless, Naomi said. People need to see that the system can correct itself. That's the whole point. They walked out of the courtroom together into the hallway that was now buzzing with activity. Attorneys stood in clusters, talking urgently. Court staff moved with purpose, probably spreading the news to other floors. Somewhere, someone was making phone calls. To the media, to other judges, to whoever needed to know that something unprecedented had just happened in Millbrook County. As they headed toward the exit, Ethan saw Williams, the bailiff who'd arrested him earlier, standing near the vending machines. Williams looked sick, his face pale and drawn. Ethan walked over to him. Officer Williams? Williams straightened up. Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was just following orders. I know, Ethan said. That's not on you. You were doing your job. But I arrested you. I handcuffed you, following what you believed was a lawful order from a judge, Ethan finished. That's what you're supposed to do. The problem isn't that you arrested me. The problem is that Hale ordered it in the first place. Williams still looked miserable. I should have questioned it. When you said you were invoking your right to appeal, I should have known that wasn't contempt. How many times have you seen Judge Hale make similar orders? Naomi asked. Williams hesitated. A few times. More than a few, Ethan pressed gently. Williams swallowed. Yeah, more than a few. But they were usually people who were yelling or disrupting things, so I figured... You figured they deserved it, Ethan said, because that's what Hale told you, implicitly or explicitly, that these people were problems that needed to be controlled. That doesn't make it right, Williams said. No, it doesn't, Naomi agreed, but it makes it understandable. Part of what we're investigating is how Hale created a culture in his courtroom where this behavior became normalized. You're not the villain here, Officer Williams. You're another witness. You'll want to talk to me? Williams asked. If you're willing, Ethan said. Williams nodded slowly. I'm willing. I've got things to say. Things I've seen. He paused. Will I lose my job? Not if you cooperate and tell the truth, Naomi said. We're not here to punish the people who were caught in Hale's system. We're here to fix the system. They left Williams looking a little less terrified and headed down the courthouse steps. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Normal life continued, cars passing, people walking, birds chirping in the old oak trees that lined Main Street. It felt surreal after the intensity of the last few hours. Ethan pulled off the flannel shirt, revealing the dress shirt underneath. He'd worn layers specifically for this. Carson handed him a tie from the briefcase, and Ethan knotted it quickly, transforming from broke contractor back to federal justice in under a minute. You okay? Naomi asked quietly. Ethan thought about it. Yeah, I think I am. That was harder than the simulations, she observed. He was worse than the report suggested, Ethan agreed. I expected hostility, but the level of personal contempt. It's one thing to read about abuse of power, Naomi said. It's another to experience it, even knowing it's temporary, even knowing you had the power to stop it at any time. It still hits different when you're the one being degraded. Ethan rolled his shoulders, trying to release the tension that had built up during the confrontation. The worst part was watching everyone else just accept it. The gallery laughing, the bailiff following orders without question, Drummond sitting there smugly. They all thought this was normal. Because for them, it was normal, Naomi said. That's what happens when corruption becomes routine. People stop seeing it as corruption. It's just how things work. Carson's phone rang. He answered, listened, then looked at Ethan. The district attorney wants a meeting. She's heard what happened and wants to discuss potential criminal charges. That was fast, Ethan said. It's a small town, Carson replied. News travels. Naomi checked her watch. We should also touch base with the review board, let them know the operation went forward and what we found. And I need to call about 20 people who are going to have questions, Ethan added. He felt the weight of what came next settling on his shoulders. The dramatic confrontation was over. Now came the hard work. Building the case, documenting everything, making sure this wasn't just a flash of justice that faded when people stopped paying attention. They started walking toward the parking lot where their cars waited. Halfway there, a voice called out, "Justice Cole!" They turned to see a young man jogging toward them. He was maybe 25, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, carrying a reporter's notebook. Tyler Chen, Millbrook Gazette, he introduced himself, slightly out of breath. Is it true that Judge Hale has been suspended? And here it begins, Ethan thought. The story going public, the narrative being shaped, the community responding. He exchanged a glance with Naomi, who gave a slight nod. Yes, Ethan said. Judge Victor Hale has been placed on temporary suspension pending an investigation into allegations of judicial misconduct. Tyler was already scribbling. What kind of misconduct? Denial of due process, abuse of authority, civil rights violations, Naomi said. The full details will be released once the investigation is complete. But there's enough evidence to suspend him? There's enough evidence to warrant immediate action, Ethan confirmed. How long has this investigation been going on? Several months, Naomi said. We don't comment on ongoing investigations beyond what we've already shared. Tyler looked up from his notebook. I heard you posed as a defendant in one of his cases. Is that true? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Federal oversight has authority to conduct integrity tests of judicial officers. What you heard is accurate. That's pretty dramatic. People are going to have strong reactions to that. People should have strong reactions to judges who abuse their power, Ethan said. That's the point. Tyler scribbled faster. Will there be criminal charges? That's premature to say, Naomi interjected. We're focused on the administrative review process right now. But it's possible? Many things are possible, Naomi said evenly. What's certain is that Judge Hale will have a full and fair hearing before the review board. Which is more than he gave a lot of people who appeared in his courtroom, Tyler observed. Ethan couldn't help a slight smile. You said that, not me. Tyler grinned. Can I quote you on that? You can quote me as saying that everyone deserves due process, regardless of their position or power, Ethan said. That includes Judge Hale. The difference is, he'll actually get it. Tyler thanked them and hurried off, probably to file his story before the competition found out. That'll be online in an hour, Carson predicted. Good, Ethan said. People should know. They reached the parking lot. Carson got into a black SUV. Naomi paused before getting into her sedan. You did well in there, she said. Kept your composure even when he was at his worst. I wanted to punch him, Ethan admitted. But you didn't. No, I remembered why we're doing this. It's not about revenge or satisfaction. It's about accountability. Still, Naomi said, it takes discipline to let someone demean you like that and not react, especially knowing you could have stopped it at any time. Ethan thought about those moments in the courtroom, handcuffed, being led away while Hale sneered from the bench, about the laughter from the gallery, the smirk on Drummond's face, the resignation in Williams's eyes. It needed to happen, he said finally. We needed to see how far he'd go. And now we know. Now we know, Naomi agreed. She opened her car door, then paused. Ethan, there's going to be pushback. Hale has friends, allies, people who've benefited from his system. They're not going to take this quietly. I know. And some of it will get ugly. They'll question our methods, accuse us of entrapment, try to make this about us instead of about him. Let them try, Ethan said. We followed every protocol. We documented everything. We gave Hale every opportunity to do the right thing, and he chose not to. Naomi smiled, but it was tired. You say that now. Wait until you're getting death threats from people who think we're destroying a good man. Is that what happened to you? On the Patterson case? Naomi had been involved in a similar oversight operation 2 years ago, exposing a judge in Oregon who'd been taking bribes. She'd told Ethan about it during their planning sessions, but she'd been sparse on the personal details. The Patterson case nearly broke me, Naomi admitted. The judge's wife organized a campaign against me. Letters to my superiors, protests outside my office, media appearances where she cried about how I'd destroyed her family. For a while, I was the most hated person in that county. But you survived it. I did. And the judge went to prison, and the people he'd hurt got some measure of justice. She met his eyes. But I won't lie to you and say it was easy. Standing up to corruption is never easy, even when you know you're right. Then it's good I'm not alone, Ethan said. Naomi nodded. No, you're not. None of us are. That's what they don't understand, people like Hale. They think power comes from isolation, from being above everyone else. But real power, real change, comes from standing together. She got into her car and drove away, leaving Ethan in the parking lot with the afternoon sun warm on his shoulders and the weight of what they'd started settling in his chest like a stone. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor at the Oversight Division. Heard about Millbrook? Call me. Another buzz. Another text. This one from a friend who is also a federal prosecutor. You're crazy. Also, you're amazing. Also, be careful. Then his phone actually rang. His sister. Ethan, what the hell? I just saw something online about you confronting a judge in... Where even is Millbrook County? He answered. Hey, Sarah, yeah, it's been a day. Let me call you back in a bit, okay? Are you safe? I'm fine, really. I'll explain everything later. He hung up and stood there for a moment, looking back at the courthouse. Through the windows, he could see movement, people going about their business, the machinery of justice grinding on even after one of its operators had been removed. This was just the beginning. The investigation would take months. The hearing would be contentious. And whatever happened after that, whether Hale was permanently removed, whether criminal charges were filed, whether real reform took root in this county, all of that was still ahead. But right now, in this moment, standing in a parking lot in a small town he'd never heard of 6 months ago, Ethan felt something he didn't always feel in this job. Hope. Maybe things could change. Maybe the system could correct itself. Maybe justice was more than just a word carved into courthouse walls. Maybe. He got into his car and drove toward the motel where he'd been staying for the last week, preparing for this operation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, he'd rest. But as he drove through downtown Millbrook, past the hardware store and the diner and the park where kids were playing, he couldn't help thinking about all the people who'd faced Hale's contempt over the years. The ones who'd left his courtroom feeling small and powerless and convinced that the law was just another weapon used against them. He thought about the woman with the parking ticket, how quickly she'd fled when told she was free to go, like she couldn't believe it was real. That was what Hale had done. He'd made people afraid of justice itself, and that, more than any specific legal violation, was the real crime. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email with an attachment. The sender was Linda Morrison, the court reporter. The subject line read, "Recordings as promised." Ethan pulled into the motel parking lot and opened the attachment. It was a compressed file, large enough that it took a minute to download over his phone's connection. When it finished, he scanned the file list. 43 audio files, each labeled with a date and case number. 43 instances of abuse preserved by a court reporter who'd known something was wrong but hadn't known how to fight it. Until now. Ethan forwarded the email to Naomi and Carson with a note. Evidence arrived. Tomorrow we start building the case. Then he went into his motel room, sat on the questionable bed, and allowed himself to feel the exhaustion that had been building all day. He'd been called names, arrested, humiliated in front of strangers, and he'd done it voluntarily, knowing he could have stopped it at any time. But the people in Linda's recordings hadn't known. They'd thought that was just how justice worked, that the powerful could abuse them without consequence. Not anymore. Ethan closed his eyes and, for the first time in hours, let himself truly breathe. The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner, a combination that somehow managed to be worse than either scent alone. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, listening to the first of Linda Morrison's recordings. The audio quality was better than he'd expected, clear enough to catch every inflection in Hale's voice, every contemptuous pause, every moment of cruelty delivered with judicial authority. The case was from 18 months ago, a custody dispute. The mother representing herself because she couldn't afford an attorney. Hale had spent 20 minutes berating her for filing paperwork incorrectly, calling her incompetent, suggesting that someone so disorganized probably shouldn't have primary custody anyway. The woman's voice got smaller and smaller throughout the recording until she was barely audible. Ethan closed the file and opened the next one. Then the next. By the fourth recording, his jaw ached from clenching. By the seventh, he had to stand up and pace the narrow space between the bed and the window. His phone rang at 9:30. Naomi. "Tell me you're not listening to all of them tonight," she said without preamble. "I'm on number 8. Ethan, stop. You'll make yourself sick. Someone needs to hear these people. Someone will, Naomi interrupted. The review board will hear every single one, but you don't need to torture yourself at 10 o'clock at night in a motel room. Get some sleep." Ethan looked at the laptop screen, at the list of files still waiting. 35 more stories of people being ground down by a system that was supposed to protect them. How do you do this job and not go crazy? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Naomi spoke again, her voice was softer. "Who says I don't go a little crazy? The trick is finding the line between caring enough to do the work and caring so much it destroys you. Some days I'm better at it than others. Which side of the line are you on today?" "Today?" She laughed, but it sounded tired. "Today I'm celebrating that we actually caught one, that we have documentation, that Hale can't hurt anyone else while we build the case. That's a win, Ethan. Don't lose sight of it by drowning in the losses." She was right, intellectually. But sitting there with those recordings, knowing that each one represented a real person who'd walked into that courtroom hoping for fairness and walked out diminished, it was hard to feel victorious. "Get some sleep," Naomi said again. "Tomorrow, the real work starts." After she hung up, Ethan did try to sleep. He made it about 45 minutes before his brain started spinning again, replaying the confrontation, analyzing what he could have done differently, worrying about what came next. At midnight, he gave up and went for a walk. Millbrook at night was quiet in a way that cities never were. A few streetlights creating pools of yellow light, the occasional car passing, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. He walked past closed shops, past houses with their windows dark, past the courthouse itself, dark except for security lights. Tomorrow that building would be full again. People with cases, lawyers arguing motions, judges making decisions that would reshape lives, the machinery of justice grinding on. But something had changed today, a crack in the facade, proof that accountability was possible. He wondered if the people sleeping in these houses knew yet, if they'd seen the news, read Tyler Chen's article, started talking about what happened. Small towns were good at gossip. By tomorrow afternoon, everyone in Millbrook would have an opinion about Judge Hale's suspension. Some would be relieved. Others would be angry, defensive, convinced this was government overreach or political persecution. That was the hard part about exposing corruption. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. There would be casualties beyond just Hale, people who'd worked with him, trusted him, built careers around him, and they'd all have to reckon with what his fall meant about their own judgment. Ethan made it back to the motel around 1 a.m. and finally managed to fall asleep with the television on, some late-night talk show providing white noise to quiet his thoughts. He woke to his phone ringing at 6:30. Carson. "We've got a problem," Carson said. Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What kind of problem?" Hale's attorney filed an emergency motion with the state Supreme Court overnight. They're arguing that the suspension order is invalid because it was based on an entrapment operation. "We didn't entrap him. We gave him every opportunity to follow proper procedure. I know that. You know that. But his attorney is Gerald Blackwood, and Blackwood doesn't lose motions." Ethan knew the name. Blackwood was a heavyweight, the kind of attorney you hired when you had money and needed to win. How did Hale afford Blackwood? "That's an excellent question," Carson said. "My guess? Someone's bankrolling his defense. Someone with an interest in keeping Hale on the bench. Or someone who's scared of what we might find if we keep digging. Also possible. Either way, there's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. Judge Pierce is already on her way to the Capitol. You need to be there too." Ethan was already pulling clothes out of his bag. I'll be there. Wear the suit, Carson advised. The good one. Blackwood's going to paint you as a cowboy who played dress-up to entrap an innocent judge. You need to look like the federal justice you are. After Carson hung up, Ethan showered and dressed, then checked his email. The news coverage had exploded overnight. Tyler Chen's article had been picked up by state outlets, then regional ones. His phone showed 17 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and 43 emails. Most were from reporters. A few were from colleagues offering support. One was from his ex-wife, which he deleted without reading. Whatever Michelle had to say about this could wait. He was checking out of the motel when he saw her. A woman, maybe 60, standing near the lobby entrance. She had the nervous posture of someone who'd been waiting but wasn't sure they should be. Justice Cole? Her voice was quiet, uncertain. Ethan turned. Yes? I'm Patricia Goodwin. She paused like the name should mean something. It took him a second, then he remembered. One of the complaints against Hale. November 2023. Threatened with jail for asking questions about procedure. Ms. Goodwin, he said, setting down his bag. I'm sorry. I should have recognized. No reason you should. We've never met. She twisted her hands together. I saw the news last night. About Judge Hale. About what you did. I'm glad something's finally happening. I wanted to thank you. Her voice cracked. I know that probably sounds stupid. You don't know me, and you didn't do it for me specifically, but thank you. Ethan felt his throat tighten. You filed a complaint. You tried to hold him accountable. And got nowhere. She laughed bitterly. Judge Herman told me I'd misunderstood the situation, that Judge Hale was just maintaining order in his courtroom, that I needed to be more respectful of judicial authority. She looked down at her hands. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I was crazy, like maybe I had been disrespectful, like maybe I deserved how he treated me. You didn't, Ethan said firmly. I know that now. Seeing the news, hearing that other people experienced the same thing, it's like I can breathe again. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I wrote everything down, everything that happened in my case, things I didn't include in the original complaint because I thought they weren't important or because I was embarrassed. I thought maybe it could help. Ethan took the envelope. It absolutely can help. And Ms. Goodwin, what you did, filing that complaint, even knowing it might go nowhere, that took courage. Didn't feel like courage. Felt like screaming into a void. Sometimes courage is screaming into a void, Ethan said. Sometimes it's doing the right thing even when you know it won't matter, because you never know when someone might be listening. She left looking a little less burdened, and Ethan added her envelope to his briefcase. One more piece of evidence, one more voice that deserved to be heard. The drive to the state capitol took 3 hours. Ethan spent it on the phone, talking to the Oversight Division's legal team, reviewing the suspension order for any procedural vulnerabilities, preparing for Blackwood's arguments. By the time he reached the Supreme Court building, he felt ready. Not confident, but ready. Naomi met him on the steps. She looked crisp and professional in a charcoal suit, every inch the federal appellate judge. Blackwood's already inside. He brought reporters. Of course he did. They walked through security and up to the 3rd floor where emergency motions were heard. The hearing room was smaller than a full courtroom but still imposing. Wood paneling, high ceiling, the state seal mounted prominently on the wall. About 30 people filled the gallery, half of them journalists based on the notebooks and recording devices. Gerald Blackwood stood near the respondents' table, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of presence that made everyone in the room aware of him. He was talking to a younger associate, gesturing with perfectly manicured hands. When he saw Ethan and Naomi enter, his expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Justice Cole, he said smoothly. Judge Pierce, I look forward to a vigorous discussion of these important constitutional issues. Mr. Blackwood, Naomi replied neutrally. They took their places at the petitioner's table. Carson slipped into the gallery behind them, along with 2 other federal agents Ethan didn't recognize. Backup, probably. Or witnesses to whatever happened next. The presiding justice was Amanda Torres, a recent appointee with a reputation for sharp questions and no patience for theatrics. She entered exactly at 9, and everyone stood. Be seated, Justice Torres said, settling behind the bench. She looked at the file in front of her, then at the assembled parties. This is an emergency motion filed by Judge Victor Hale seeking to vacate a temporary suspension order issued by the Federal Judicial Oversight Division. Mr. Blackwood, you filed this motion. You go first. Blackwood stood, and Ethan had to admire the performance. The man moved like he owned the room. Thank you, Your Honor. This case presents fundamental questions about the limits of federal power and the integrity of our judicial system. My client, Judge Victor Hale, has served Millbrook County with distinction for 23 years. He has presided over thousands of cases, maintained order in his courtroom, and earned the respect of his community. Ethan caught Naomi's slight grimace. Earned the respect. That was one way to describe it. Yesterday, that distinguished career was destroyed, not through due process, not through legitimate oversight, but through an elaborate sting operation that would make the FBI's most questionable tactics look restrained. Blackwood's voice rose slightly, just enough for emphasis. Justice Cole, a federal official with significant power and resources, created a false identity, manufactured a fake legal dispute, and deliberately provoked my client in order to justify predetermined sanctions. That's not accurate, Ethan started, but Justice Torres held up a hand. You'll have your turn, Justice Cole. Continue, Mr. Blackwood. The petition includes a detailed timeline of Justice Cole's operation. He researched my client's cases, identified patterns of behavior, and constructed a scenario specifically designed to trigger those behaviors. This wasn't oversight. This was entrapment. And the fact that it was done by federal officials makes it even more concerning. Justice Torres leaned forward. Counselor, are you arguing that federal authorities lack the power to conduct integrity tests of state judges? I'm arguing that such tests, if conducted at all, must be done within constitutional bounds. Justice Cole violated my client's rights by creating a fictitious proceeding. The proceeding wasn't fictitious, Naomi interjected. It was based on a real case with a real plaintiff. A real case that Justice Cole inserted himself into for the sole purpose of provoking Judge Hale, Blackwood countered. Your Honor, imagine if this tactic becomes standard practice. Any judge, anywhere, could be targeted by federal authorities who decide to test them by manufacturing scenarios designed to make them fail. The chilling effect on judicial independence would be catastrophic. Or it would encourage judges to follow the law regardless of who's standing in front of them, Ethan said before he could stop himself. Justice Torres looked at him. Justice Cole, you'll have your chance to respond. Right now, I want to hear Mr. Blackwood's argument. Blackwood smiled slightly, like Ethan had just proven his point about federal overreach. Your Honor, the suspension order itself is also procedurally defective. It was issued solely on the authority of Justice Cole and Judge Pierce, both of whom had just conducted what amounts to a covert operation against my client. Where's the independent review? Where's the neutral arbiter? This is investigator, prosecutor, and judge all rolled into one. The Oversight Division has protocols, Naomi began. Protocols that were apparently bypassed in favor of immediate suspension based solely on the conclusions of two federal officials who'd just spent months planning how to trap my client. Blackwood turned to address the gallery as much as the justice. This should concern everyone in this room. If federal authorities can destroy a state judge's career based on a single staged encounter, none of us are safe from politically motivated investigations. Are you suggesting this was politically motivated? Justice Torres asked sharply. I'm suggesting that when federal officials invest months into targeting a specific judge, we should at least question their motives. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the table. Blackwood was good. He was taking the facts that looked damning for Hale, and spinning them into a narrative about government overreach and persecution. And based on the expressions in the gallery, some people were buying it. Justice Torres made a note, then looked at Naomi and Ethan. Your response? Naomi stood. Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood's arguments sound compelling until you examine the actual record. May I approach with exhibits? You may. Naomi walked forward with a thick folder and handed copies to Justice Torres and Blackwood's team. These are the complaints filed against Judge Hale over the past 3 years. 17 formal complaints from defendants, attorneys, and court staff. All dismissed by judges who serve in the same district as Judge Hale. All describing similar patterns of behavior, denial of due process, personal attacks, abuse of authority. She pulled out another set of documents. These are transcripts from 43 separate cases, documented by the court reporter over 2 years. Each one shows Judge Hale engaging in conduct that violated basic standards of judicial behavior, mocking defendants, refusing to hear evidence, making decisions based on personal prejudice rather than law. Your Honor, Blackwood interrupted, these transcripts weren't part of the original investigation. Because we couldn't get them, Naomi said flatly. The court reporter, Ms. Linda Morrison, kept them as backup recordings, but was afraid to come forward until after Justice Cole's operation proved that oversight was possible. That fear, Your Honor, is exactly what this investigation was designed to address. Justice Torres was reading through the documents, her expression unreadable. These complaints were all dismissed? Every single one, Naomi confirmed, by judges who had professional and personal relationships with Judge Hale. That's why federal oversight was necessary. The local system had proven unwilling or unable to police itself. That's not unusual, Blackwood argued. Judges dismiss frivolous complaints all the time. 17 complaints over 3 years is not normal, Ethan said, standing up. And when you read the actual allegations, Your Honor, you'll see these weren't frivolous. These were credible accusations of civil rights violations, documented by multiple independent sources. Justice Torres held up a hand. I'll review the materials. What I want to understand right now is the scope of Justice Cole's operation. Justice Cole, walk me through what you did. Ethan took a breath. The Oversight Division received multiple reports about Judge Hale's conduct. We reviewed the complaints, interviewed witnesses, and confirmed a pattern of behavior that warranted investigation. Standard procedure in these cases is to conduct an integrity test, essentially to see if the judge treats people fairly when they don't know they're being watched. So you created a fake identity? I used my real name but presented myself as someone without power or resources. Everything else about the case was legitimate. Real plaintiff, real dispute, real contract issues. But you deliberately made procedural errors. I presented as a pro se litigant who didn't fully understand court procedure. That's not uncommon. Thousands of people represent themselves in court every year. The question was whether Judge Hale would help such a person navigate the system or exploit their vulnerability. And he exploited it, Justice Torres said. But it wasn't really a question. He did more than exploit it, Ethan said. He called me names, refused to hear evidence, made judgments about my character based on my appearance and economic status. And when I tried to invoke my constitutional right to appeal, he had me arrested. Blackwood was on his feet. Because Justice Cole was being disruptive, I quoted the law, Ethan said, his voice rising. I cited my right to appeal judicial misconduct, and he called it contempt. That's not maintaining order, Mr. Blackwood. That's silencing dissent. Your Honor, this is exactly my point, Blackwood said. Justice Cole admits he deliberately provoked my client. I didn't provoke him, Ethan interrupted. I gave him every opportunity to follow proper procedure. He chose not to. That's not entrapment. That's documentation. Justice Torres held up both hands. Gentlemen, please, one at a time. She looked at Ethan. Justice Cole, be specific. What exactly did you do that you believe constitutes provocation? Ethan thought carefully. I asked questions about procedure. I attempted to present evidence. I invoked my rights under the law. If those actions constitute provocation, then we've already lost. Because that's what any defendant should be able to do without fear of retaliation. But you knew Judge Hale had a pattern of responding poorly to such questions, Blackwood said. You deliberately pushed his buttons. His buttons shouldn't include arresting people for citing the law, Naomi interjected. Your Honor, this is the fundamental issue. Mr. Blackwood wants to make this about Justice Cole's tactics. But the real question is whether Judge Hale's response was acceptable. And it wasn't. Not by any standard. Justice Torres was quiet for a moment, reading through the suspension order. The order cites multiple violations. Let's go through them. First allegation, denial of due process. What's your evidence? Naomi walked through it methodically. The refusal to hear Ethan's evidence. The mockery of his attempts to present a defense. The predetermined judgment based not on facts, but on Hale's prejudice. Each point was backed by transcript excerpts, audio recordings, and witness statements. By the time she finished, Justice Torres was frowning. This is concerning. This is one bad day taken out of context, Blackwood countered. Judge Hale was frustrated by a difficult defendant. I wasn't difficult, Ethan said. I was poor, or at least I appeared to be, and Judge Hale treated me like garbage because he thought I couldn't fight back. You're editorializing, Blackwood said. I'm reporting what happened. Justice Torres intervened again. Let's move to the arrest. Justice Cole, you invoked your right to appeal. What exactly did you say? Ethan recited it from memory. I said, Your Honor, I'm invoking my right to appeal this decision based on judicial misconduct and denial of due process. And Judge Hale responded by ordering my immediate arrest for contempt. Did you raise your voice? Use profanity? Make threats? No, Your Honor. I spoke calmly and clearly. Judge Pierce was in the courtroom observing. She can confirm. Naomi nodded. Justice Cole's demeanor was appropriate throughout. Judge Hale's response was not. Blackwood shuffled through his notes. Your Honor, contempt of court is within a judge's discretion, not when it's used to punish someone for exercising their rights, Justice Torres said sharply. Mr. Blackwood, I've read enough. Unless you have something beyond these process arguments, I'm ready to rule. Blackwood's expression flickered. Just for a second, surprise or frustration crossed his face. Your Honor, I would ask the court to consider the broader implications. I've considered them, Justice Torres said. The broader implication here is that we have a judge who appears to have systematically abused his authority for years, and a federal oversight system that finally documented it. That's not government overreach. That's accountability. She looked at her notes again, then at Hale, who'd been sitting quietly at the respondent's table throughout the hearing. Judge Hale, do you wish to address the court? Hale stood slowly. He looked diminished compared to yesterday, older, tired, less certain. Your Honor, I've served this state for 23 years. I've tried to maintain order and efficiency in a system that's underfunded and overwhelmed. If I was harsh sometimes, it was because I had to be. You can't let people think they can walk all over you, or the whole system breaks down. There's a difference between maintaining order and violating rights, Justice Torres said. I never violated anyone's rights, Hale insisted. I was tough, yes, but tough isn't illegal. Arresting someone for citing the law is illegal, Ethan said quietly. Hale's eyes snapped to him, and for just a moment, Ethan saw the fury from yesterday resurface. Then Hale controlled it, smoothed his expression, turned back to Justice Torres. I acted in what I believed was the interest of justice. Your interest, Ethan said, not justice. That's enough, Justice Torres said. She closed the file in front of her. Here's my ruling. The suspension order was properly issued under federal oversight authority. The investigation was conducted within appropriate bounds. Integrity testing has been upheld by multiple courts as a legitimate oversight tool. Judge Hale's response to the test revealed serious concerns about his fitness to serve. Blackwood started to speak, but Justice Torres continued. However, I am troubled by the lack of independent review before suspension. While I won't vacate the order, I'm modifying it. Judge Hale will remain suspended, but the Oversight Division must convene a preliminary hearing within 2 weeks. At that hearing, Judge Hale will have the opportunity to present evidence in his defense, call witnesses, and challenge the findings. If the review panel determines the suspension was unwarranted, it will be immediately lifted. She looked at both sides. That's my order. The emergency motion is denied, but the modification stands. 2 weeks, people. Get it done. She stood, and everyone rose. As Justice Torres exited, the gallery erupted into conversation. Reporters making calls, spectators arguing, the noise level rising instantly. Blackwood gathered his papers with practiced efficiency. He leaned over to Hale, said something Ethan couldn't hear, then approached their table. 2 weeks, he said to Naomi. We'll be ready. So will we, Naomi replied. After Blackwood and Hale left, Ethan sank into his chair. That could have gone worse. Could have gone better too, Naomi said. 2 weeks isn't much time to prepare. It's enough, Carson said from behind them. He'd moved forward from the gallery. We've got the transcripts, the recordings, the witness statements. We just need to organize it. And prepare for Blackwood to tear it all apart, Ethan added. He's going to bring character witnesses, find every case Hale handled well, paint him as a dedicated public servant having one bad day. Let him try, Naomi said. We've got 43 bad days on tape. They walked out into the hallway, which was packed with reporters shouting questions. Ethan answered a few, confirming the hearing schedule, restating his confidence in the evidence, but kept moving. This wasn't the time for detailed interviews. They needed to prepare. In the parking garage, away from cameras and recorders, Ethan finally let himself feel the weight of it all. He almost had her, he said quietly. Torres. For a minute there, Blackwood almost convinced her this was overreach. But he didn't, Naomi said, because the evidence speaks for itself. Evidence can be explained away. Witnesses can be discredited. We both know that. Yes, Naomi agreed, which is why we need to be perfect, not because Hale deserves it, but because every other corrupt judge is watching. If we lose this, if Hale walks away without consequences, it sends a message that the system protects its own no matter what. Ethan nodded. He knew she was right. This wasn't just about one bad judge in one small county. It was about whether accountability was real or just theater, whether the law applied equally or whether power created its own immunity. 2 weeks, he said. Let's get to work. They drove back to Millbrook separately. Ethan spent the drive on the phone with the Oversight Division's research team, making lists of witnesses to prep, exhibits to organize, arguments to anticipate. By the time he pulled into the courthouse parking lot, they'd set up a temporary command center in one of the empty offices. His head was spinning with details. Inside, Carson had already created a war room. Whiteboards covered 2 walls filled with case numbers and names. File boxes were stacked in the corner. A conference table was buried under documents. 3 other federal agents were working at laptops, cross-referencing data. This is everyone from the division who could get here on short notice, Carson explained. We've also got 2 paralegals arriving tomorrow and a forensic accountant. Forensic accountant? Ethan asked. Blackwood's funding. Someone's paying his bills, and I want to know who. Smart. Follow the money. If they could prove Hale was being bankrolled by someone with a vested interest in keeping him on the bench, it would undermine Blackwood's narrative about a dedicated public servant being persecuted. Naomi arrived an hour later with her own team, 2 law clerks from the Ninth Circuit and an investigator who specialized in judicial misconduct cases. They spread out across the conference room, dividing up the work. One group focused on the legal arguments they'd need to counter Blackwood. Another worked on witness preparation. A third started building a timeline of Hale's worst cases. Ethan took the hardest job, listening to all 43 of Linda Morrison's recordings and identifying the clearest examples of abuse. He needed cases that were indefensible, where Hale's conduct was so obviously wrong that no amount of spin could justify it. By midnight, he'd narrowed it down to 8. 8 cases where Hale had crossed lines so blatant that even Blackwood would struggle to defend them. A single mother denied custody because she filed paperwork late. An elderly veteran threatened with jail for asking questions. A teenager mocked for his accent while trying to contest a traffic ticket. Each one a small tragedy, a moment where someone powerless had been crushed by someone who should have protected them. He looked up to find Naomi watching him from across the room. You should sleep, she said. So should you. I will. Soon. She walked over, looked at his notes. 8 cases? 8 that are undeniable. The rest are bad, but Blackwood could argue they were just harsh or impatient. These 8, these are cruel. Naomi sat down beside him. Can we get the people involved to testify? Working on it. Carson's team is tracking them down. Some have moved out of state. Some probably won't want to relive it. But some will, Naomi said. Some will want their day in court, their chance to be heard. Ethan thought about Patricia Goodwin, standing in the motel lobby, thanking him for something that shouldn't have required thanks. Yeah, some will. They worked through the night, fueled by coffee and the knowledge that 2 weeks wasn't nearly enough time. When dawn broke, painting the windows with pale gray light, they had the skeleton of a case. Now they just needed to put flesh on the bones, and hope that when the hearing came, justice would matter more than power. The first witness they tracked down was Michael Reeves, a 32-year-old mechanic who'd appeared before Hale 14 months ago over a dispute with a landlord. According to Linda Morrison's recording, Hale had spent 15 minutes questioning whether Reeves was intelligent enough to understand the lease agreement he'd signed. Carson found him working at an auto shop 2 counties over. When he called to ask if Reeves would testify, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Testify about what? Reeves finally asked. About your experience in Judge Hale's courtroom. Another silence. Man, I just want to forget that whole thing. I lost the case, lost my security deposit, moved on. I understand, Carson said, But Judge Hale is under investigation for how he treats people. Your testimony could help. Help who? Some other poor bastard who has to stand in front of him? No thanks. I'm done with courts and judges and all of it. Carson tried for another 10 minutes, but got nowhere. Reeves hung up eventually, polite but firm. Not interested. Just wanted to live his life. When Carson reported back, Ethan wasn't surprised. Can't blame him. Going through it once was probably enough. We need at least 3 victims willing to testify, Naomi said. Recordings are powerful, but nothing beats live testimony. A real person telling their story, looking the review panel in the eye. Then we keep asking, Ethan said. The second call went to Jennifer Walsh, a divorced mother of 2 who'd lost a custody modification hearing. Hale had questioned her parenting skills based on the fact that she worked 2 jobs and asked her grandmother to help with childcare. The recording was painful to hear, Walsh's voice getting smaller and smaller as Hale implied she was neglecting her children by working to support them. When Carson reached her, Walsh started crying before he finished explaining why he was calling. I can't, she said through the tears. I'm sorry, I just can't. My ex used that hearing in our divorce proceedings. Said even the judge thought I was a bad mother. I'm still fighting for equal custody. If I testify against a judge, they'll use it against me, say I'm vindictive, say I'm... Her voice broke completely. Carson promised he understood and hung up. He looked at Ethan across the conference table. She's terrified. And she's got reason to be. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. This was the other part of corruption, the way it kept victims silent through fear and shame. Hale's abuse didn't end when the gavel came down. It rippled outward, affecting custody battles and job prospects, and how people saw themselves. By the end of day 3, they'd contacted 12 potential witnesses. 9 had refused. 1 hadn't called back. 1 had moved to Oregon and couldn't afford to travel. That left Robert Chen, the man who'd been mocked for his immigration status during a traffic hearing. Chen agreed to meet in person. He drove to Millbrook on his lunch break from the restaurant where he worked as a manager. Ethan and Naomi sat with him in the courthouse conference room while Carson stood by the door. Chen was in his 40s, wearing a button-down shirt with the restaurant's logo on the pocket. His hands fidgeted with a paper coffee cup as he spoke. I came here when I was 8, he said. My parents brought me. I grew up in this country, went to school here, got married here, had kids here. This is my home. We know, Naomi said gently. We've read your complaint. The complaint that went nowhere, Chen said bitterly. I sat in Judge Herman's office and explained what Hale said to me, word for word, and Herman looked at me like I was making it up, like I was some troublemaker trying to cause problems for a respected judge. What exactly did Judge Hale say? Ethan asked, even though he'd heard the recording. Chen took a breath. I was contesting a traffic ticket, running a red light. I explained that the light had just turned yellow when I entered the intersection, but I couldn't stop safely because the road was wet. Judge Hale asked if I understood English well enough to read traffic signs. I said yes, of course. Then he asked where I was from. I said California. He said, no, where are you really from? Like I wasn't American enough to count. That's not relevant to a traffic violation, Naomi said. I know, but everyone in the courtroom was staring at me, and I felt small, like I didn't belong. He kept pushing, asking about my immigration status, whether I had proper documentation. Finally, I said my parents came from Taiwan, but I was a citizen. He said, so you are from somewhere else. Maybe that's why you don't respect our traffic laws. Chen's voice had gotten quieter with each sentence. He ruled against me, doubled the fine, and suggested I take a driver's education course to learn American road rules. Ethan felt anger coil in his chest. And when you complained? Herman said Hale was just being thorough, that judges need to assess a person's understanding of the law, and sometimes that includes asking about background. He made it sound reasonable, made me feel like I was overreacting. You weren't, Ethan said firmly. What Hale did was discriminatory and illegal. Chen looked at him, and there was something desperate in his eyes. If I testify, will it matter? Or will they just protect him again? It was the same question everyone had been asking in one form or another. Will it matter? Or is this just theater? I can't promise you the outcome, Ethan said honestly. What I can promise is that this time there's documentation, recordings, multiple witnesses, a federal investigation instead of local judges reviewing their friend. It's not the same situation as before. But it might end the same way, Chen said. It might, Naomi admitted. Or it might be the moment something actually changes, the moment someone powerful faces real consequences. Chen was quiet for a long time. He finished his coffee, crushed the cup slowly in his hands, stared at the wall behind Ethan's head. My daughter is 15, he finally said. Last year she got in trouble at school for talking back to a teacher. Nothing serious, but we had to go to a hearing. The whole time she was terrified, shaking. Afterward, I asked her why she was so scared, and she said, "What if the principal is like that judge you told us about? What if she doesn't listen to me because of how I look?" His eyes met Ethan's. I did that. I taught my daughter to be afraid of authority because of what Hale did to me, because I didn't fight back hard enough. You filed a complaint, Ethan reminded him. You did fight back. I filled out paperwork. That's not the same thing. Chen stood up. If I testify, what do I have to do? Relief flooded through Ethan. Show up at the hearing. Tell your story, just like you told it to us. Answer questions from both sides. Blackwood's going to try to make me look bad, isn't he? Probably, Naomi said. He might question your memory, suggest you misunderstood, imply you have some grudge against Judge Hale. But that's why we prep witnesses. We'll go through every possible question, make sure you're ready. Chen nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. Not for me, I've already lived through it, but for my daughter. So maybe she doesn't have to be afraid. After Chen left, Carson let out a breath. One down, we need at least 2 more. The breakthrough came on day 5. One of Naomi's law clerks had been going through the dismissed complaints and found something unusual. 3 separate complaints from different people, all mentioning the same incident, a case where Hale had threatened a public defender with sanctions for asking too many questions. The public defender was named Sarah Okonkwo, and she still worked in Millbrook County. When they called her, she answered on the first ring. I've been waiting for someone to call, she said. They met at a coffee shop away from the courthouse. Sarah was in her early 30s, black, with the kind of exhausted intensity that came from years of fighting uphill battles. She sat across from Ethan and Naomi with her arms crossed, defensive but alert. I need to know this isn't a waste of time, she said without preamble. I've complained about Hale 3 times. 3 times I was told to drop it, to be more professional, to stop making trouble. So before I tell you anything, I need to know you're serious. We're serious, Ethan said. Judge Hale is suspended pending this investigation. We have recordings, transcripts, multiple witnesses. This isn't going away. Sarah studied him. You're the one who pretended to be a defendant. I saw the news. That's me. Ballsy. She almost smiled. Stupid, but ballsy. Little bit of both, Ethan admitted. She relaxed slightly, uncrossing her arms. Okay, what do you want to know? Tell us about the incident that generated 3 complaints, Naomi said. Sarah's expression hardened. Marcus Thompson case. Marcus was 19, charged with shoplifting. First offense, minimal value. We're talking about $60 worth of groceries. I was his public defender. During the hearing, I tried to present evidence that Marcus had just lost his job and was struggling to feed his younger siblings. Their mother was in the hospital. Father wasn't in the picture. I had testimony from neighbors, from his former employer, character witnesses. And Judge Hale refused to hear it? Ethan guessed. Worse, he mocked me for wasting the court's time with sob stories, said the law doesn't care about excuses, only facts. I argued that mitigating circumstances are relevant for sentencing. He told me I was being disruptive, and if I didn't sit down, he'd hold me in contempt. Did you sit down? Naomi asked. No, I kept arguing, because Marcus deserved a defense, not a public defender who rolled over the second a judge got annoyed. Sarah's voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the anger underneath. Hale gave me a formal warning right there in open court, said I was unprofessional and insubordinate. Then he sentenced Marcus to 6 months in county jail. For a $60 shoplifting charge, Carson said from where he'd been listening quietly. That's insane. That's Hale, Sarah said. Marcus served 4 months before we got the sentence reduced on appeal. But by then, he'd lost his apartment, his siblings went into foster care temporarily, and he had a record that made finding work nearly impossible. Last I heard, he was still trying to put his life back together. Can we talk to Marcus? Ethan asked. Sarah shook her head. He moved to Atlanta 6 months ago, started over somewhere Hale couldn't touch him. I don't blame him. But you're willing to testify about what happened? About that case, and about a dozen others where I watched Hale destroy people because he could. Yeah, I'll testify. I've been waiting for someone to actually do something about him for 3 years. It won't make you popular, Naomi warned. Public defenders have to work with judges. If you're seen as someone who testifies against them. I don't care, Sarah interrupted. I became a public defender to help people who can't afford attorneys. How can I do that if I stay silent while judges abuse them? If testifying against Hale means some judges won't like me, fine. At least I'll be able to sleep at night. They had their second witness. The third came from an unexpected source. Williams, the bailiff who'd arrested Ethan, called Carson directly. I need to talk to someone, Williams said, about what I've seen. They met at Williams's house that evening. He lived in a modest ranch-style home on the edge of town, the kind of place with a well-maintained lawn and an American flag on the porch. He invited them in nervously, offered coffee that no one wanted, and sat on the edge of his recliner like he might bolt at any moment. I've worked in that courthouse for 18 years, Williams said. Started as a deputy, moved to bailiff 7 years ago. I've seen a lot of judges come and go. Hale's the worst. Worst how? Naomi asked. Williams looked down at his hands. He gets off on it, the power. I've watched him smile when people cry, seen him get this look in his eyes when someone's scared. It's like he enjoys it. Can you give us specific examples? Ethan asked. For the next 2 hours, Williams did. Cases where Hale had ordered arrests for minor infractions. Times he'd threatened defendants with jail to force plea deals. Incidents where he'd denied continuances to people who had legitimate emergencies. Williams had documented nothing. He wasn't a court reporter, didn't have recordings, but his testimony as a longtime court officer would carry weight. Why come forward now? Naomi asked. Williams took a long time answering. Because when I arrested you, when I put those cuffs on knowing you just cited the law, I couldn't pretend anymore that I was just following orders. I was part of it, part of his system, and I hated myself for it. You were doing your job, Ethan said. No, I was doing what Hale told me to do. There's a difference. Williams met his eyes. I've got 2 kids, both in high school. One of them asked me last night if the judge I work for really did all the things people are saying online. And I had to look at my kid and say yes. Yes, he did. And I saw most of it happen and didn't do anything. You're doing something now, Naomi said quietly. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better. Williams stood up, paced to the window. Will they come after me? The other court staff, judges, people who think Hale's getting railroaded? Probably some will, Ethan said honestly. Small towns have long memories. That's what I figured. Williams turned back to them. I'll still do it, testify, I mean. But I need to know, is there any chance this actually works? That he faces real consequences? It was the same question everyone kept asking, and Ethan still didn't have an answer that felt adequate. I believe there's a chance. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. But you can't promise. No, I can't promise. Williams nodded slowly. Okay, that's honest at least. When do you need me? They spent the next week preparing. Chen, Sarah, and Williams came to the temporary office every evening after work. They went through their testimonies line by line, anticipated Blackwood's questions, practiced staying calm under pressure. Chen struggled with talking about the discrimination without getting angry. Sarah had the opposite problem. She was so controlled, so professional, that Naomi worried she'd come across as cold. Let yourself feel it, Naomi told her during one session. The panel needs to see that this matters to you, not just as a legal issue, but as a human one. If I let myself feel it, I'll fall apart, Sarah said. No, you won't, Ethan said. You'll show them why you became a public defender in the first place. Why you fight for people like Marcus Thompson even when judges threaten you. That's not weakness, that's strength. Williams was the easiest to prep, mostly because he'd been in courtrooms for so long that he understood the theater of it. But he struggled with a different issue, guilt. Every time I go through what I saw, I keep thinking about the times I could have said something and didn't, he admitted during one session. How many people did Hale hurt because I just stood there and let it happen? You're saying something now, Carson reminded him. That's what matters. Does it? Because it feels like too little, too late. Ethan understood that feeling. He'd worked in oversight for 6 years, had exposed 4 corrupt judges before Hale, and every time he wondered about the cases that came before his investigation, the victims he'd never know about, the harm that could have been prevented if someone had acted sooner. "We can't fix the past," Ethan said. "All we can do is try to stop it from continuing." On the evening before the hearing, Naomi called everyone together in the conference room. The walls were still covered in case notes and timeline charts, but everything had been organized, color-coded, reduced to its essential elements. They were as ready as they'd ever be. "Tomorrow's going to be hard," Naomi said. "Blackwood is going to attack our evidence, our witnesses, our motives. He's going to make this about federal overreach and persecution. Our job is to keep the focus on what actually matters, the pattern of abuse, the violations of rights, the harm Hale caused." "What if we lose?" Chen asked quietly. The question hung in the air. They'd all been thinking it, but no one had said it out loud until now. "If we lose, we appeal," Naomi said. "We take it to the next level. We don't stop until we've exhausted every option." "And if we exhaust every option and still lose?" Sarah pressed. Naomi looked at Ethan. He stood up, walked to the window. Outside, Millbrook was settling into evening. Streetlights coming on. People heading home from work. Normal life continuing while they prepared to challenge the foundation of the local justice system. "If we lose," Ethan said slowly, "then we've still done something important. We've documented the abuse. We've given victims a chance to be heard. We've shown that accountability is possible, even if it doesn't happen this time. And maybe, the next time someone sees a judge acting like Hale, they'll remember this investigation and find the courage to speak up." "That's not very reassuring," Chen said. "No," Ethan agreed. "But it's honest." Sarah laughed, but it was bitter. Honesty. That's all we've got going into a hearing where the other side has one of the best attorneys in the state and probably half the legal establishment ready to defend them. "We've got more than honesty," Naomi said. "We've got evidence, recordings, transcripts, a pattern so clear that even Blackwood can't spin it away." "Want to bet?" Williams muttered. They broke up around 10. Witnesses headed home to try to sleep. Carson and his team started packing up materials to transport to the hearing room. Ethan and Naomi stayed behind, doing a final review of the exhibits. "You okay?" Naomi asked after everyone else had left. Ethan thought about it. "Ask me tomorrow after the hearing." "That bad?" "I just keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Blackwood finding some procedural error that invalidates the whole investigation. The review panel deciding that Hale's 23 years of service outweigh 3 years of documented abuse. The witnesses freezing up on the stand. Any of it could tank the case." "Any of it could," Naomi agreed. "Or it could all work. The panel could look at the evidence and see exactly what we see. A judge who betrayed his oath and hurt vulnerable people. Chen, Sarah, and Williams could be powerful and compelling. Blackwood could overplay his hand and make himself look desperate." "You really believe that?" "I believe it's possible," Naomi said. "And possibility is enough to keep fighting for." Ethan packed up his notes, shut down his laptop. "Do you ever wonder if we're making a difference? With these investigations, all this work, does it actually change anything?" "Yes," Naomi said without hesitation. "Every time we expose a corrupt judge, we send a message that the law applies to everyone. Every time we give victims a chance to be heard, we restore a little bit of faith in the system. It's not enough, and it's not fast enough, but it's something." "Even when we lose?" "Especially when we lose," Naomi said, "because it shows we're willing to fight battles that might not be winnable. That matters too." They locked up the office and walked out to the parking lot together. The night was cool, clear, stars visible despite the streetlights. Somewhere in this town, Hale was probably in his own home, preparing his own defense. Blackwood was probably working late, crafting arguments designed to make abuse sound like dedication. And tomorrow, in a hearing room packed with people who'd either suffered under Hale's authority or benefited from it, they'd find out whether justice was more than just a word. Ethan drove back to his motel. He'd kept the same room, despite the smell and the questionable mattress, and tried to sleep. His mind kept running through the presentation, anticipating questions, rehearsing answers. Around 2 a.m, he gave up and turned on the television. A local news channel was running a story about the hearing. They interviewed people on the street in Millbrook, asking their opinions about Judge Hale's suspension. The responses were divided. Some people defended him, tough but fair, kept criminals in line, never had a problem with him myself. The others were more critical, always seemed mean, heard stories about times someone looked into it. One woman, maybe 70, looked directly into the camera and said, "My grandson had a case with Judge Hale. Came out of that courtroom crying, said the judge made him feel like garbage. Grandson was 17 years old. Whatever they find in this investigation, I hope they throw the book at him." Ethan turned off the television and sat in the dark. Tomorrow would be one of the most important hearings of his career. Not because of the legal complexity or the high-profile nature, but because of what it represented. A test of whether the system could actually hold itself accountable. He thought about all the people who'd refused to testify, the ones too scared, too traumatized, too exhausted to relive their experiences. They were counting on Chen and Sarah and Williams to speak for them. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous. Around 4, Ethan finally drifted off. He dreamed he was back in Hale's courtroom, but this time he couldn't reveal his identity. The handcuffs stayed on, Williams led him away, and no one came to stop it. He woke up sweating, his heart racing. The hearing was scheduled for 9. Ethan was at the courthouse by 7, helping Carson set up the exhibits, making sure every recording was queued up, every transcript organized. By 8, the gallery was already filling up. Reporters, local attorneys, people from the community. Someone had even brought a sign that said, "Justice for Judicial Abuse." Security made them leave it outside. At 8:30, Blackwood arrived with Hale. The judge looked composed, expensive suit, fresh haircut. He nodded to people in the gallery like he was attending a social function rather than a hearing that could end his career. Blackwood looked equally confident, carrying himself with the assurance of someone who expected to win. Chen, Sarah, and Williams arrived together. They sat in the front row of the gallery, looking nervous but determined. Ethan gave them what he hoped was an encouraging nod. At exactly 9 o'clock, the 3-member review panel entered. Justice Torres had assigned 2 additional judges to hear the case with her, Judge Raymond Kemp from the 3rd District and Judge Lisa Huang from the 7th. All 3 had reputations for being tough but fair. Everyone stood. Justice Torres took the center seat, Kemp and Huang flanking her. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of the suspension of Judge Victor Hale," Torres announced. "The Oversight Division will present evidence supporting the suspension. Judge Hale will have the opportunity to respond. At the conclusion of this hearing, the panel will determine whether the suspension should be upheld, modified, or vacated. Let's begin." Naomi stood. "Your Honors, we'll be presenting testimony from 3 witnesses, along with audio recordings, transcripts, and documentary evidence demonstrating a pattern of judicial misconduct spanning at least 3 years. Our first witness is Robert Chen." Chen walked to the witness stand like he was heading to an execution. He was sworn in, took his seat, gripped the armrest with white knuckles. Naomi walked him through his testimony gently. The traffic ticket, Hale's questions about his background, the discriminatory comments. Chen's voice shook, but he got through it. Then Blackwood stood up for cross-examination, and Ethan felt his stomach tighten. This was where everything could fall apart. "Mr. Chen," Blackwood said pleasantly, "how long ago did this incident occur?" "About a year and a half." "And in that year and a half, have you discussed this case with anyone?" "I filed a complaint with Judge Herman, and I told my family." "Have you discussed it with the media? With other people who have complaints against Judge Hale?" "No, Have you been coached on what to say today?" "I met with the oversight team to prepare." "So, yes, you've been coached." Blackwood smiled. "Mr. Chen, is it possible you misunderstood Judge Hale's questions? That he was simply trying to assess your understanding of the English language as it related to reading traffic signs?" "No, he was..." "Is it possible that your own sensitivity about your background caused you to interpret neutral questions as discriminatory?" Chen's face flushed. "I know the difference between neutral questions and..." "Mr. Chen, have you ever felt discriminated against in other situations? By other authority figures?" Ethan almost stood up to object, but this wasn't a trial. There were no formal rules of evidence. Blackwood could ask almost anything. "Sometimes, yes, but..." "So you have a history of perceiving discrimination. Isn't it possible that you brought that perception into Judge Hale's courtroom? No, Chen said, his voice stronger now. I know what happened. He asked where I was really from. He said, I didn't respect American traffic laws because I was from somewhere else. That's not my perception. That's what he said. Blackwood smiled again, like Chen had just proven his point. We only have your word for that, though. Judge Hale's memory of the incident may be quite different. We have the court transcript, Naomi interjected. We have a partial transcript that doesn't include tone or context, Blackwood countered. Your honors, mister. Chen seems like a sincere person who believes his interpretation of events. But belief isn't the same as fact. He sat down, and Ethan could see Chen's hands shaking. The cross-examination had been brutal, but effective. Blackwood had planted doubt without proving anything, which was exactly his strategy. Sarah Okonkwo was next. She was better prepared for Blackwood's tactics, meeting each question with calm professionalism. But Blackwood found her weakness too. He suggested she had a grudge against Hale because he'd reprimanded her multiple times, that her testimony was revenge rather than truth. Williams held up better. As a court officer with 18 years of experience and no apparent axe to grind, his testimony carried weight that was harder to undermine. But Blackwood still tried, suggesting Williams was angling for a promotion or trying to cover for his own failures to protect defendants. By the time the witness testimony concluded, it was after 2 in the afternoon. The panel took a short break, and Ethan huddled with Naomi in the hallway. How do you think it's going? He asked. Hard to tell. Torres is hard to read. Kemp keeps taking notes, which could be good or bad. Huang hasn't asked many questions. Blackwood's good. He's very good, Naomi agreed. But we have the recordings. Those don't lie. When they reconvened, Naomi played 5 of Linda Morrison's recordings. The panel listened in silence as Hale's voice filled the hearing room, mocking, contemptuous, cruel. Ethan watched their faces, trying to gauge reactions. Torres's expression tightened. Kemp stopped taking notes and just listened. Huang closed her eyes during the worst parts. After the last recording finished, there was a long silence. Then Justice Torres spoke. Mr. Blackwood, I'd like to hear from Judge Hale directly. Is he prepared to testify? Blackwood stood. He is, Your Honor. Hale walked to the witness stand with his head high, every inch the dignified public servant. He was sworn in and took his seat, looking directly at the panel with what appeared to be sincere contrition. Judge Hale, Torres began, we've heard testimony and recordings suggesting a pattern of abusive behavior toward defendants and attorneys in your courtroom. What's your response? Hale took a deep breath. Your Honors, I've served this community for 23 years. In that time, I've handled thousands of cases. Were there moments when I was harsh? Yes. Were there times I lost patience? Absolutely. But those moments came from a place of frustration with a system that's overwhelmed and underfunded, not from malice. He looked earnest, almost vulnerable. Ethan had to admit it was a good performance. The recordings you heard today, Hale continued, they're real. I said those things, but they've been taken out of context, stripped of the chaos and pressure of running a courtroom with limited resources. I was trying to maintain order, trying to keep things moving, trying to serve justice efficiently. By mocking people? Huang asked, speaking for the first time. By questioning their intelligence and background? By holding them accountable, Hale said. Your Honor, with all respect, you serve at the appellate level. You see cases after they've been filtered through multiple levels of review. I see them raw, angry defendants, incompetent attorneys, people who lie and waste time. Sometimes strong language is necessary to cut through the noise. Strong language is one thing, Torres said. What we heard in those recordings went beyond strong language. I acknowledge that, Hale said. And if I could go back and rephrase some of my comments, I would, but that doesn't make me corrupt. It makes me human. Blackwood stood. Your Honors, if I may, Judge Hale has submitted letters of support from 37 attorneys who regularly practice in his court. They uniformly describe him as demanding, but fair, efficient, and committed to justice. We also have statistics showing his courtroom has one of the lowest appeal rates in the district. That suggests his decisions, while sometimes delivered harshly, are legally sound. Naomi rose. Your Honors, we're not questioning Judge Hale's legal knowledge. We're questioning his treatment of people who appear before him. Those statistics don't account for how many people were too intimidated to appeal or too poor to afford it. Nor do they account for how many people received fair hearings and just outcomes, Blackwood countered. The argument went back and forth for another hour. Blackwood presented his character witnesses, attorneys who praised Hale's efficiency, court staff who described him as dedicated. Naomi countered with more recordings, more transcript excerpts, a timeline showing the pattern of complaints. Finally, Justice Torres called a halt. We've heard enough. The panel will deliberate and issue a decision within 48 hours. This hearing is adjourned. Everyone stood as the panel exited. The gallery erupted into conversation. Chen, Sarah, and Williams were immediately surrounded by reporters asking for reactions. Hale and Blackwood left quickly through a side door, avoiding the press. Ethan and Naomi stood at their table, neither quite ready to move. Well, Naomi said eventually, now we wait. Now we wait, Ethan agreed. And in that moment, standing in a hearing room that smelled like old wood and stale coffee, surrounded by the detritus of a day spent fighting for accountability, Ethan realized something. Win or lose, they'd already accomplished something important. They'd given voice to people who'd been silenced. They'd challenged a system that protected its own. They'd proven that oversight was possible, even when it was hard. Whether it would be enough, that remained to be seen. The 48 hours felt like 48 days. Ethan stayed in Millbrook, checking his phone compulsively, rereading transcripts he'd already memorized, second-guessing every decision they'd made during the hearing. Naomi flew back to her circuit but called twice a day to check in, her own anxiety bleeding through her usually composed voice. On the morning of the second day, Carson knocked on Ethan's motel room door at 7. "Thought you might want company," he said, holding up a bag from the diner down the street. "Figured you haven't been eating." He was right. Ethan had been living on coffee and antacids. They sat at the small table by the window, and Carson pulled out eggs, bacon, toast that had already gone cold. "You did good at the hearing," Carson said. "We'll see." "No, I mean it. The witnesses held up. The evidence was solid. Even Blackwood couldn't spin those recordings into something acceptable." "He did a pretty good job trying," Ethan said, pushing eggs around his plate without eating them. "That whole speech Hale gave about being human, about the pressure of the job, I saw Kemp nodding. We might lose this." "We might," Carson agreed, "but you gave it everything you had. Can't do more than that." Ethan's phone rang at 11:30. Naomi. "Torres's clerk just called," she said without preamble. "Decision's ready. They're convening at 2 o'clock. "That's fast." "Fast usually means they reached consensus quickly. Could be good or bad." "Helpful, thanks." Naomi laughed, but it was tight. "I'm getting on a plane now. Should land around 1:15. Meet you at the courthouse?" "I'll be there." Ethan called Chen, Sarah, and Williams to let them know. All three said they'd come. He spent the next 2 hours pacing the motel room, running through every possible outcome. Best case, permanent removal, potential criminal charges. Worst case, suspension lifted, Hale back on the bench, everything they'd done for nothing. Most likely case, somewhere in between, probably unsatisfying for everyone. He arrived at the courthouse at 1:30. The steps were packed with reporters, cameras, people holding signs both for and against Hale. Security had been doubled. 2 sheriff's deputies stood at the entrance, checking IDs. Inside, the hallway outside the hearing room was chaos. Tyler Chen from the Gazette was there, along with reporters from every major outlet in the state. Ethan saw Williams standing against the wall, looking like he might be sick. Sarah was talking to another public defender, her expression guarded. Robert Chen sat on a bench with his wife, holding her hand. Naomi arrived at 1:40, still in her travel clothes, her hair slightly messed from the plane. "Any word?" "Nothing. They're keeping it locked down until the announcement." Blackwood swept past them at 1:50, Hale trailing behind. The judge looked gray, older than he had at the hearing. Blackwood's confidence seemed dim too, or maybe Ethan was just projecting his own hopes onto the man's face. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doors opened. The hearing room filled fast. Every seat taken, people standing along the walls, security having to turn away the overflow. Ethan and Naomi took their places at the petitioner's table. Blackwood and Hale sat across from them. The 3 witnesses sat in the front row of the gallery. Justice Torres entered with Kemp and Huang. All 3 looked tired. Everyone stood, then sat. The room was absolutely silent except for the sound of someone's phone vibrating until they frantically turned it off. Torres looked out at the packed room. This hearing has generated significant public interest, which is appropriate given the serious nature of the allegations and the importance of judicial accountability. Before we announce our decision, I want to remind everyone that this is a legal proceeding, not entertainment. Whatever happens next, it will be received with the dignity this process deserves. She opened a folder in front of her. In the matter of Judge Victor Hale's suspension, the panel has reviewed all evidence presented, including witness testimony, audio recordings, transcripts, and documentary evidence. We have also considered Judge Hale's testimony and the character evidence presented by his counsel. Ethan felt his heart hammering. Just say it, he thought. Whatever it is, just say it. The question before us is whether Judge Hale engaged in a pattern of judicial misconduct serious enough to warrant permanent removal from the bench. The evidence presented by the Oversight Division is extensive and troubling. We heard recordings that demonstrate a consistent pattern of demeaning behavior toward defendants, particularly those who appeared pro-se or lacked resources. Torres paused, looked directly at Hale. Judge Hale, your conduct as documented in these recordings falls far below the standards we expect from members of the judiciary. You mocked people seeking justice in your court. You made decisions based on personal prejudice rather than legal merit. You used your position to humiliate rather than serve. Hale's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. However, Torres continued, and Ethan felt his stomach drop, we must also consider the context of these incidents and the question of proportionality. 23 years of service cannot be erased by several instances of poor judgment, even if those instances are serious. No, Ethan thought. Don't do this. Don't let him off. Naomi's hand found his under the table, squeezed hard. That said, Torres went on, and her voice got harder, we cannot ignore the pattern documented by the Oversight Division. This was not simply a few bad days. This was systematic behavior that violated the rights of vulnerable people over an extended period. She looked down at her notes, then back up. The panel's decision is as follows. Judge Victor Hale is hereby permanently removed from his position as District Court Judge for Millbrook County, effective immediately. The room erupted. Someone shouted, someone else gasped. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Torres banged her gavel hard. Order, we're not finished. The noise died down to whispers. Ethan was still processing the words, permanently removed. They'd won. They'd actually won. Torres continued. In addition to removal, we are referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation into potential criminal charges related to civil rights violations. While we cannot determine criminal liability, the evidence suggests possible violations of federal law that warrant prosecutorial review. She looked at Hale again, and there was something like sadness in her expression. Judge Hale, you had an opportunity to serve your community with honor. You chose instead to use your power to diminish and harm. That choice has consequences. She closed the folder. The panel also commends the Federal Judicial Oversight Division for their thorough investigation and for giving voice to people who were previously silenced. Justice Cole, Judge Pierce, your work exemplifies what accountability should look like in our system. Torres stood. This hearing is concluded. The room exploded again as soon as she left. Reporters shouting questions, people arguing, the noise level overwhelming. Ethan sat frozen at the table, trying to absorb what had just happened. Naomi was crying, actually crying, tears streaming down her face. We did it, she said. We actually did it. Carson appeared from somewhere, clapping Ethan on the shoulder hard enough to hurt. Permanent removal, criminal referral. That's as good as it gets. Ethan looked over at Hale. The man was sitting perfectly still, staring at nothing. Blackwood was talking to him urgently, probably already planning appeals, but Hale didn't seem to hear. He looked hollowed out, emptied. For just a second, Ethan felt something like pity. Then he remembered the recordings, the people Hale had hurt, and the feeling evaporated. Chen appeared at their table, his wife beside him. Thank you, he said, and his voice broke. I didn't believe. You did this, Ethan told him. You testified. You told your story. That mattered. Sarah was there too, and Williams, both looking stunned. Is this real? Williams asked. They actually removed him? It's real, Naomi confirmed. People were pressing in from all sides now, reporters with microphones, supporters wanting to shake hands. A few angry people shouting about government overreach. Security started clearing the room, directing everyone to the hallway. Outside the courthouse, Ethan and Naomi did a brief press conference. "Keep it short," Naomi had advised. "Don't gloat, don't attack, just confirm the facts and move on." "Justice Cole, how do you respond to critics who say your investigation was entrapment?" Tyler Chen called out. "The investigation followed all federal protocols and was conducted within legal bounds," Ethan said. "Judge Hale had every opportunity to follow proper procedure. He chose not to." "What message does this send to other judges?" someone else asked. "That accountability is real," Naomi answered. "That power comes with responsibility. That the law applies to everyone, including those who enforce it." "Judge Hale's attorney says they'll appeal. Your response?" "Judge Hale has that right," Ethan said. "Just like every defendant who appeared in his court had rights that he violated." They wrapped it up after 10 minutes and escaped to Carson's SUV. Inside, with the doors closed and the noise muted, Ethan finally let himself breathe. "We need to celebrate," Carson said. "There's a steakhouse on Main Street." "No," Ethan said. "Not yet. There's something I need to do first." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a modest house on Oak Street. Ethan had gotten the address from the case files. He knocked, and after a moment, the door opened. Patricia Goodwin stood there, the woman who'd waited for him at the motel, who'd given him the envelope with her full story. She looked at him, then at the others, and her hand went to her mouth. "You heard?" Ethan asked. She nodded, tears starting. "I watched it online. I couldn't believe, after everything, I couldn't believe it actually happened. It happened because people like you kept speaking up, even when no one listened, because you documented what happened, because you refused to let him make you believe you deserved it." Patricia was crying fully now. "He made me feel so small, so stupid. And I started to believe it, started to think maybe I really was those things." You never were," Naomi said gently. "He was wrong. And now there's a record of that. An official record that says what he did was unacceptable." They stayed for a few minutes, then left Patricia with her relief and her tears. As they drove back toward downtown, Ethan's phone started ringing constantly. His supervisor congratulating him. Colleagues from oversight. His sister demanding details. His ex-wife, which he ignored again. They ended up at the steakhouse Carson had mentioned. It was early enough that they got a quiet corner booth. They ordered food no one was hungry enough to eat, and drinks they definitely needed. "To accountability," Carson said, raising his glass. They clinked glasses, drank. The whiskey burned going down, but it felt good, real. "What happens now?" Naomi asked. "With the criminal investigation?" "That's up to the Attorney General," Ethan said. "We'll provide all our evidence, testify if needed, but it's their call whether to prosecute." "Think they will?" Ethan considered. "Hard to say. Civil rights cases against judges are difficult. There's a high bar for proving criminal intent, but we gave them enough to work with. The arrest for citing the law is pretty indefensible." "Even if they don't prosecute, we got him off the bench," Carson said. "That's the main thing." "Is it?" Naomi asked quietly. "Because there are probably a dozen other judges out there right now doing the same thing Hale was doing. We got one. What about the others?" It was the question that haunted everyone in oversight. Every investigation, every exposure, every removal, they were drops in an ocean of potential corruption. For every Hale they caught, how many operated undetected? "We do what we can," Ethan said. "Investigate when we get credible complaints, document the patterns, give victims a platform. It's not enough, but it's something." They ate a little, talked more, decompressed from weeks of tension. By the time they left the restaurant, dusk was settling over Millbrook. The streetlights were coming on, the same peaceful small-town scene as always. Except now, something had changed. One less corrupt judge. One more proof that accountability could happen. Ethan went back to his motel room and finally allowed himself to feel the exhaustion. He slept for 12 hours straight, dreamless. The kind of sleep that comes after you've been carrying weight so long you forgot what it felt like to set it down. He woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and dozens of messages on his phone. News coverage had exploded overnight. National outlets were picking up the story. Legal analysts were debating the implications. Social media was having the predictable meltdown, half celebrating, half furious about federal overreach. One email stood out. It was from Jennifer Walsh, The divorced mother who'd been too afraid to testify. The subject line said, "Thank you." The message was short. "I saw the news. I wish I'd been brave enough to help, but I'm grateful others were. Maybe now my ex can't use that hearing against me anymore. Maybe now someone will believe me when I say what happened wasn't right. Thank you for not giving up." Ethan read it 3 times, then forwarded it to Naomi with a note. "This is why we do it." She replied immediately, "Yes, it is." Over the next week, Ethan wrapped up the investigation. He returned to his office, filed final reports, debriefed with his supervisors. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation and requested all their materials. Naomi went back to the Ninth Circuit. Carson moved on to his next case. The temporary office in Millbrook was dismantled, the whiteboards erased, the file boxes packed and shipped to federal archives. A month after the hearing, Ethan got a call from Williams. "Just wanted to let you know," the bailiff said, "there's a new judge assigned to Hale's courtroom, Judge Rachel Morrison, transferred from the 2nd District. She's different, good different. Yesterday I watched her spend 20 minutes helping a pro se defendant understand how to present evidence properly. Made me remember what courts are supposed to be like." "How are people treating you?" Ethan asked. "After you testified?" Williams was quiet for a moment. "Mixed. Some people respect it. Others think I'm a traitor. But I can look my kids in the eye now, so that's worth something." "It's worth everything," Ethan said. Sarah Okonkwo sent him an email a few weeks later. She'd been assigned to Judge Morrison's court and reported that the change was night and day. "I actually got to defend my clients yesterday without being threatened. It felt revolutionary." Robert Chen didn't contact him directly, but Ethan saw a letter to the editor in the Millbrook Gazette 3 months after the hearing. Chen wrote about the importance of standing up to discrimination, even when it felt hopeless. He mentioned telling his daughter about the hearing, about testifying, about seeing justice actually happen. "I want her to grow up believing that speaking truth to power matters," he wrote, "because I finally believe it myself." The Attorney General's investigation took 6 months. In the end, they declined to file criminal charges, citing the high burden of proof required for civil rights cases against judicial officials. Ethan was disappointed, but not surprised. Removal from the bench was the main goal, and they'd achieved that. Hale filed an appeal of his removal, as expected. It was denied at every level. He tried to get his pension restored. The state judiciary refused. Last Ethan heard, Hale had moved to another state, was working as a legal consultant, had faded from public view. The real victory wasn't what happened to Hale. It was what happened because of the investigation. The state legislature passed new oversight regulations requiring independent review of judicial complaints instead of letting local judges police their own. 3 other sitting judges resigned rather than face similar investigations. The Federal Judicial Oversight Division received an influx of complaints from people who'd been too afraid to come forward before but now believed it might matter. Ethan went back to work, took on new cases, exposed other corrupt officials. Some investigations succeeded, others stalled. That was the nature of the job. But Millbrook remained special, a reminder that the system could work when people refused to accept that it wouldn't. A year after the hearing, Ethan found himself back in Millbrook for a conference on judicial accountability. He arrived a day early, drove through town just to see it. The courthouse looked the same. Main Street looked the same. Everything seemed normal, unchanged. Except it wasn't. He knew that inside that courthouse, a different kind of justice was happening now. That people representing themselves weren't automatically dismissed. That defendants were treated with basic dignity. That one tyrant had been removed and the message sent that others could be too. He stopped by the diner where he'd had coffee during the investigation. The same waitress was working, older woman with tired eyes. She recognized him. "You're the one who got Hale," she said, pouring his coffee without asking. "I'm part of the team that investigated him," Ethan corrected. "Whatever, you got him." She smiled, and it transformed her face. "My nephew had a case with the new judge last month. Came home and said she actually listened to him. Haven't heard him say that about a court experience ever, so thank you." After she walked away, Ethan sat there with his coffee, looking out at the street. A mother walked by with a stroller, a kid on a bike, an old man walking his dog. Normal life, continuing as always, but maybe a little bit better. A little bit fairer. His phone rang. Naomi. "Where are you?" she asked. Millbrook, conference is tomorrow, came early. Want company? I'm only 2 hours away. Always. She arrived at dusk. They had dinner at the steakhouse where they'd celebrated, talked about current cases, caught up on life. Over dessert, Naomi got quiet. You ever think about what would have happened if Torres had ruled the other way? She asked. If Hale had been reinstated? All the time, Ethan admitted. Would it have been worth it? All that work? All those people testifying and reliving trauma, just to end up with nothing? Ethan thought about Patricia Goodwin, crying with relief, about Robert Chen telling his daughter that speaking up matters, about Jennifer Walsh finally believing someone when she said what happened wasn't right, about Williams looking his kids in the eye. Yeah, he said, it would have been worth it, because we gave people their voices back. We documented the truth. We tried. That matters, even if we lose. You really believe that? I have to, Ethan said. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Naomi nodded slowly. Sometimes I wonder if we're just treating symptoms instead of curing the disease. Getting one corrupt judge at a time instead of fixing whatever in the system creates them. Probably, Ethan agreed, but treating symptoms keeps people alive while you work on the cure. And maybe every corrupt judge we expose makes the next one a little more afraid. Maybe eventually the fear of consequences becomes greater than the temptation to abuse power. That's optimistic for you. I have my moments. They finished their coffee, paid the bill, walked out into the cool evening air. The courthouse was lit up across the street, its windows glowing against the darkening sky. You know what I think about sometimes? Naomi said, looking at the building. That first moment in the courtroom when you revealed who you were. The look on Hale's face. Terror, Ethan said. He realized he'd been caught. More than that. He realized that all those people he'd dismissed as powerless weren't. That the system he thought would protect him might not. That accountability was real. She turned to him. That moment, that's what I think about when the work gets hard. The look on a corrupt official's face when they understand they're not untouchable. Keeps you going? Every time. They stood there for a while, two federal judges in a small town that most people had never heard of, looking at a courthouse that had been the site of so much injustice and then, finally, accountability. You heading back tonight? Ethan asked. Tomorrow, after your conference. Figured I'd sit in, see what the next generation of oversight investigators are learning. Revolutionary concept, following proper procedure, and treating people with dignity. Wild stuff, Naomi agreed. The next day, Ethan gave the keynote address to a room full of judges, investigators, and legal advocates. He talked about the Hale case without using names, focused on methodology and ethics. But at the end, he allowed himself one personal observation. The hardest part of oversight work isn't the investigation, he said. It's believing that it matters when you've seen so many cases go nowhere, so many complaints dismissed, so many powerful people protected. It's easy to become cynical, to think the whole thing is rigged. He looked out at the audience. But I've learned something through cases like this one. Justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It doesn't belong to judges or attorneys or federal investigators. It belongs to the people we serve. And every time we give someone a chance to be heard, every time we hold power accountable, we're returning justice to where it belongs. The audience applauded. Afterwards, several people came up to ask questions, share their own stories, talk about investigations they were struggling with. Ethan listened, advised where he could, encouraged when he couldn't. A young woman approached, maybe 26, fresh out of law school by the look of her. Justice Cole? I just wanted to say, the Millbrook case is why I went into oversight work. I read about it, saw what you did, and thought that's what I want to do with my career. It's hard work, Ethan warned her. I know, but it's important work. She smiled. And sometimes you win. Sometimes you win, Ethan agreed. He drove back to the Capitol that evening, his motel room key returned, his temporary life in Millbrook concluded. But as he drove, he thought about all the people whose lives had intersected with this investigation. The victims who'd found their voices, the witnesses who'd risked their comfort to tell the truth, the court reporter who'd documented abuse for years, waiting for someone to listen. And he thought about the next person who would walk into a Millbrook County courtroom, nervous and scared and hoping for fairness. They'd get Judge Morrison now instead of Judge Hale. They'd be treated with dignity instead of contempt. They'd have a real chance at justice. That was worth every hour of preparation, every moment of doubt, every battle fought and sometimes lost. 6 months later, Ethan got an envelope in the mail. No return address, but the postmark said Millbrook. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a small article about the county dedicating a new public defender's office. The article mentioned that funding had increased after the Hale investigation revealed how many people were navigating the legal system alone. There was also a handwritten note on a piece of notebook paper. The handwriting was shaky, like it belonged to someone elderly or unused to writing. "You don't know me," it said. "I had a case with Judge Hale 4 years ago. He ruled against me, and I lost my home. I thought that was just how courts worked, that people like me didn't matter. When I saw the news about your investigation, I cried. Not because it changed what happened to me, but because someone finally said it wasn't right, that I wasn't crazy for thinking I deserved better. Thank you for that. It helped me more than you'll ever know." It was unsigned. Ethan pinned the note to the bulletin board in his office, right next to his federal credentials. A reminder of why the work mattered. Not for the big wins or the headlines or the satisfaction of taking down a corrupt official. For the anonymous person who just needed to know they weren't crazy, weren't alone, weren't invisible. For everyone who'd ever walked into a courtroom hoping for justice and walked out diminished. For the next person who'd face a judge like Hale and find instead someone who remembered that power was meant to serve, not to crush. The investigation was over. The case was closed. But the impact rippled outward, touching lives Ethan would never know about, changing systems in ways that wouldn't be fully understood for years. That was enough. It had to be. Because justice wasn't a single moment, a single victory, a single corrupt official removed from power. Justice was the slow, grinding work of making the system a little bit better, a little bit fairer, a little bit more worthy of the ideals it claimed to uphold. And sometimes, when you were lucky and brave and willing to do the work even when it seemed impossible, justice actually happened. Ethan looked at the note one more time, then turned back to his computer. He had 3 new complaints to review, 2 investigations to plan, and a system that still needed people willing to fight for it. So he fought. Because that's what you did when you believed in justice. You fought, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, you won.